Ginny settles into her office. The fluorescent hum a stark contrast to the quiet focus she brings to the cold case file. She systematically works through the brittle yellow reports from 1975. The weight of time is palpable in the faded ink of the original detective's notes, the grainy black and white crime scene photos that capture a moment of unspeakable tragedy. She pores over every detail, the initial observations of the responding officers, the preliminary coroner's report on Patrick and Jennifer McGowan, and the limited evidence logs. She scrutinizes the witness statements, most likely from neighbors and early responders, looking for any inconsistencies, any fleeting detail that might have been overlooked. Her eyes, sharpened by years of hypervigilance, pick up on nuances. A repeated phrase, a curious omission, a description of the house or yard that seems slightly off. Then she turns to the maps and property records. She confirms the address, noting that the McGowan house is indeed still standing, a silent sentinel in a neighborhood that would have been relatively new, perhaps still finding its footing, back in 1975. A neighborhood developed only 5 years prior would have had its own unique characteristics, newer homes, perhaps a mix of families just starting out, and specific architectural styles common to the early 70s in Little Rock. Ginny pulls out current maps, historical city plats, overlaying them mentally. She's not just looking at the house, she's reconstructing the environment of the crime. What were the adjacent properties like then? Were there vacant lots, thickets of trees, or construction sites that might have provided cover or escape routes? What would the lighting have been like at night? Was there street lighting? Were there specific natural features of the land that might have played a role? The sun beat down on the dusty road, raising a cloud of fine red dirt with every step. 8-year-old Ray Jenkins clutched the worn strap of his canvas school bag, his stomach rumbling, not from hunger, not yet, but from a familiar dread. The walk home always felt longer when he knew what waited for him. He rounded the corner of the unpaved street, his eyes immediately snagging on the familiar sight. Their small, run-down house, its paint peeling like old skin, stood out like a sore thumb amongst the slightly better-kept homes of the other families. But it wasn't just the house. It was the figures slumped on the front porch swing. His mother, her dress askew, a nearly empty bottle clutched loosely in one hand, her head lolling against his father's shoulder. His father, equally disheveled, mumbled incoherently, a faint, sickly sweet smell drifting from them. They were arguing, or perhaps just making noise, their voices slurred and loud enough to carry. Ray's face burned. He glanced quickly up and down the street. Mrs. Henderson, from 2 houses down, was watering her prize-winning roses, her back to them, but Ray knew she heard. He knew she saw. He could feel her pity, her judgment, like a hot brand on his skin. He imagined the whispers that would follow him at school the next day, the furtive glances, the kids pointing. He didn't want to walk past them. He wanted to disappear into the dusty ground. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He wished the earth would swallow him whole. Instead, he dropped his gaze to his worn shoes, picked up his pace, and scurried past, not daring to look up, not daring to acknowledge them. He slipped in the back door. The loud, messy tableau on the porch, a stain on his soul. Another time, a few years later, perhaps 10 or 11, the shame was sharper, laced with a bitter resentment. He'd actually done well on a math test, gotten a perfect score. He'd carried the paper home, a small, fragile seed of pride blossoming in his chest, hoping for something, anything. He found the kitchen empty, save for the overturned chair and the acrid smell of stale beer. A half-eaten, forgotten meal sat on the table, cold and congealed. His parents were gone, again. He didn't know where, or for how long. The silence of the house was oppressive, louder than any shouting. The pride in the math test shriveled, replaced by the familiar ache of abandonment. He crumpled the paper, throwing it into the overflowing trash bin. He walked into the living room, past the grimy windows that hadn't seen a good cleaning in months. Through the panes he could see the neatly manicured lawns of his neighbors, the tidy curtains, the warm glow of lamps where families were gathering for dinner. He saw children playing catch in a distant yard, their parents laughing with them. He imagined the smell of baked chicken, the sound of easy conversation. His own house was cold, empty. The front door had been left ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. He walked over, his small hand reaching to close it, to shut out the judging eyes of the world, to seal away the mess, the shame, the profound aching neglect. He closed the door with a quiet click, but the echoes of his parents' neglect, the bitter taste of shame, and the burning resentment towards those perfect families outside would stay with him. These were the seeds that would fester, growing into the silent rage that would one day lead him to collect small personal pieces from other families, symbols of the very warmth and connection he had been denied. She begins to form a mental picture, trying to step back in time, to imagine the sounds, the smells, the feeling of that September night almost 5 decades ago. This initial deep dive isn't about finding new evidence, but about absorbing every existing detail and allowing her highly attuned pattern recognition to begin its work, subtly connecting disparate pieces, looking for the underlying rhythm of the crime. Her next step is clear. She needs to see the house and its surroundings with her own eyes. The printed reports are one thing, but standing on the very ground where the tragedy unfolded will activate a different level of her perceptive abilities, allowing her to compare the present reality with the historical record she's just absorbed. It's about grounding the abstract facts in a tangible space. Ginny knew the current residents of the McGowan house would be her first, most delicate point of contact. Cold cases often meant disturbing the peace of people who had no connection to the crime other than living in its shadow. She opted for a direct yet respectful approach, a short, earnest letter followed by a phone call. To her relief, the couple, the Millers, were incredibly understanding. They had known vaguely about the house's tragic past, a lingering neighborhood whisper, but had never delved into the details. Out of a mix of civic duty and genuine curiosity, they agreed to let her come by. The next afternoon, Jenny, with Finn quietly by her side, pulled up to the house. It was a well-maintained, single-story brick home, clearly loved by its current occupants. As she stepped out, Finn's tail gave a single slow wag, his eyes scanning the yard before settling on Jenny, a reassuring presence. He didn't exhibit any immediate agitation, no alerts. That was good. It meant no lingering threat in the air, but it also meant the environment itself held no obvious immediate triggers for a sensitive nose or ears related to the long past violence. As Ginny walked around the perimeter with the Millers, comparing the current landscape to the faded 1975 crime scene photos, her hypervigilance kicked into overdrive. She noted the mature trees that were saplings back then, the dense shrubs that might have offered concealment, the fence lines that had changed, the pathways that might have been different. She cross-referenced the angle of a shadow in an old photograph with the sun's position now, mentally adjusting for time. The Millers pointed out a renovated patio, a new shed. Each modification, no matter how small, had to be mentally stripped away to reveal the original scene. While Ginny absorbed the physical layout, Finn, off leash but always within sight, methodically sniffed around the yard. He wasn't overtly searching, but his nose was active, sampling the air, the grass, the old concrete. He moved with a quiet purpose, occasionally pausing at a particular spot, his nostrils flaring subtly before moving on. Ginny observed him out of the corner of her eye, noting his lack of significant interest. No strong sense of distress, no lingering human fear response that Finn's sensitive nose might pick up on, even decades later. It was a blank slate, as expected. Later that week, back in her office, Ginny shifted her focus from the crime scene to the surrounding neighborhood. She needed to know who else was around in 1975, and if any of those families still resided in the area. She delved into Pulaski County's real estate records. It was a tedious process, cross-referencing property deeds from the early 70s with current ownership, looking for anomalies or long-term residents. The Pulaski County Circuit Clerk's office had scanned records back to 1819, but finding what she needed often meant navigating old microfilm and digital archives. She wasn't just looking for property owners, but the names associated with the original purchases in the neighborhood's nascent years. Her goal was to identify families who had lived there since the development, hoping they might still own their homes or at least be reachable through family members who still did. These long-term residents, even if they weren't direct witnesses, could hold invaluable peripheral information. They would remember the rhythm of the neighborhood, the gossip, the unusual cars, the people who came and went, or simply the general atmosphere before and after the MC Gowan murders. Their memories, though aged, could offer the subtle contextual patterns that Ginny's intuition craved. The list of potential long-term residents began to grow, a new kind of witness list emerging from the dusty real estate files. It was time to start knocking on doors, or more likely, making careful phone calls, and see if the echoes of 1975 still resonated in the memory of Little Rock's long-standing residents. The ripples of Ray Jenkins's monstrous secret extended far beyond the immediate circle of his victims. While bringing closure to the families of the murdered was paramount, Ginny understood that his own surviving relatives, particularly his daughters, Teresa and Phyllis, were also, in a profound and agonizing way, victims themselves. They had lived under the shadow of a beloved father who was, in reality, a ruthless serial killer. Ginny made the journey back to California not in her official capacity to gather evidence, but in a more personal role, accompanied by Finn. She wanted to ensure the daughters had resources and support as they navigated this horrifying truth. "How do you even begin to live with this?" Teresa asked, her voice raw, her eyes red-rimmed from endless tears. "Every memory, every time he was quiet, every time he left for a job, it's all tainted." Was he thinking about it then? Was he planning? Phyllis, ever the more pragmatic, looked utterly drained. "We loved our dad. He worked hard, he sent us money. And now he's this thing that did these unspeakable acts and makes you question everything about yourself, about your own judgment." Ginny listened, her own experiences with trauma resonating deeply. She understood the crushing weight of their predicament. Their father hadn't just committed crimes, he had, in a sense, stolen their past, twisting cherished memories into objects of dread. The love they held for him was now inextricably bound with the horror of his actions. This was a unique form of victimhood, often overlooked but no less devastating. "What you're feeling is entirely normal," Ginny affirmed gently, her voice calm and steady. Finn, sensing their distress, lay his head on Teresa's lap, offering silent comfort. "It's a form of profound grief, but it's also a betrayal. You're grieving the father you thought you knew, and you're grappling with the reality of the monster he truly was." She explained the concept of secondary trauma and the specific challenges faced by family members of notorious criminals. Their shame, their guilt by association, their questioning of their own identities. "How could I not have known? Does this make me bad?" were all valid, agonizing responses. Ginny brought them information on support groups specifically for families of perpetrators, a rare but vital resource. She connected them with therapists specializing in complex grief and trauma, emphasizing that their pain was legitimate and deserved healing, even as the world condemned their father. "You are not your father's crimes," Ginny stated firmly, looking them both in the eye. "His actions were his own. You are his daughters, yes, but you are also separate individuals. You carry his name, but not his guilt." Teresa clutched Finn's fur, finding a measure of solace in his warmth. "It's just, every time I see a news report or hear someone talking about it, it feels like a punch to the gut. Like we're monsters too." "That's the burden he left you with," Ginny acknowledged. "But you have the power to define who you are. Your willingness to cooperate, to help bring answers to these other families, speaks volumes about your character. You've chosen truth and justice even when it was the most painful path imaginable." The meeting concluded with a quiet understanding. Teresa and Phyllis were caught in an unbearable paradox, loving a man who was utterly unlovable in his actions. Ginny knew their journey would be long, perhaps lifelong, but by acknowledging their unique suffering, by providing them with resources, and by reinforcing that they too were victims, she hoped to offer them a path, however difficult, towards reclaiming their own identities from the long, dark shadow of Raymond M. Jenkins. The echoes of his silence for them would forever intertwine with the echoes of their own shattered familial memories. The investigation into Ray Jenkins's heinous crimes had brought Ginny O'Malley face to face with the shattered lives of his victims' families. It had forced her to delve into his traumatic past and to witness, through his chilling observations, the twisted genesis of his rage. Yet, a crucial piece of his personal puzzle remained largely untouched: his marriage. Ginny knew that to truly understand the complete psychological profile of Ray Jenkins, she needed to speak with his wife. It would be an incredibly delicate conversation, given the monstrous revelations about the man she had shared her life with. She knew that Mary Jenkins, though having passed away several years prior to Ray, might have provided clues or insights into his behavior. So, Ginny instead contacted Mary Jenkins's sister, Clara May Higgins, who had remained close to Mary throughout her life. Ginny hoped Clara May could offer a glimpse into the domestic side of the man who was a quiet killer on the road. Clara May lived in a small, well-kept home in rural Arkansas, filled with the scent of potpourri and old photographs. She greeted Ginny with a weary politeness, her eyes reflecting decades of unspoken burdens. Ginny explained the purpose of her visit with the utmost care, detailing the evidence, the pattern, and the psychological profile, while ensuring Finn remained a comforting, silent presence at her feet. Clara May listened, her face growing paler with each revelation. Mary. She knew something wasn't right. Clara May finally whispered, her voice barely audible. She just didn't know what. Clara May described Mary as a quiet, stoic woman devoted to her daughters but often withdrawn. Mary loved Ray in her own way, Clara May explained, but he was never truly there. Even when he was home, he was distant, like a ghost in his own house. He'd sit for hours in his shed, tinkering or just staring. She called it his thinking place. Ginny's mind immediately connected this to Ray's later years, where he spent more time in his shed and gardening. It wasn't just a place for work, it was a sanctuary for his inner world, where he could process his dark deeds, or, in later life, rechannel his need for control. Did Mary ever mention anything specific that worried her? Ginny pressed gently. Clara May thought for a long moment she'd get upset about his trips, not just that he was gone, but how he was. He'd come back, different. More quiet than usual, sometimes a dark mood would hang over him for days. And then, sometimes, he'd be almost serene. Too serene, Mary thought, after being gone so long. Like he'd finally gotten what he wanted. Ginny filed this away. The post-crime serenity was a known trait in some serial offenders, a temporary calm after the psychological release of the act. And his things? Ginny asked, gesturing vaguely. Did she ever find anything unusual amongst his belongings beyond his work tools? Clara May shook her head. Mary was meticulous, but Ray kept his work stuff and anything personal separate. His shed was his domain. She respected that. Never went in there unless he asked her to get something, and she certainly wouldn't have looked under the floorboards. Her eyes welled with tears. He kept so much hidden from her, all these years, all these families. The conversation with Clara May confirmed what Ginny had suspected. Mary Jenkins lived with a man who was a deeply compartmentalized individual. His personal life with his family was a veneer, a necessary facade that allowed him to blend into society. The true Ray Jenkins resided in his transient work life and, most chillingly, within the confines of his own mind and the secret trophy box. His wife, unknowingly, lived beside a monster, sensing an unsettling distance but never comprehending the unspeakable horror he carried within him. This final piece of his personal background cemented the tragic portrait of Ray Jenkins, a man so profoundly shaped by his early trauma that he built an entire life around appearing normal, all while harboring a secret world of unimaginable violence. The list Ginny had compiled from the real estate records was her next target. She knew that after nearly 5 decades, memories would be fragile, perhaps even distorted by time, and the stories that had undoubtedly grown around the MC Gowan tragedy. Her psychological background told her to approach with extreme patience, empathy, and a gentle touch, especially with elderly witnesses. This wasn't an interrogation, it was an archaeological dig into faded recollection. She started with Mrs. Eleanor Vance, now 92, who had lived 3 houses down from the Missy Gowans since the neighborhood was built. Ginny brought Finn, letting him settle quietly by her feet in Mrs. Vance's living room. The elderly woman, though sharp, was prone to tangents, her mind drifting to details about the neighborhood block parties or the prices of milk in the 70s. Ginny, a picture of calm, listened patiently, her hypervigilance noting every tremor in Mrs. Vance's voice, every subtle shift in her gaze. Finn, ever attuned, occasionally lifted his head, a soft sigh escaping him as Mrs. Vance recounted a particularly vivid, though tangential memory. Ginny understood. Finn was reflecting the subtle emotional shifts. A silent cue to her to let the narrative flow, knowing a kernel of truth might be buried within the meandering stories. I remember Jennifer, Mrs. Vance said, her eyes distant. Always smiling, even though Patrick worked those awful late shifts, she was always out in the yard with the children. Ginny nodded, prompting gently. Did you ever see anyone unusual around the house, Mrs. Vance? Any unfamiliar cars, perhaps? Mrs. Vance frowned, her brow furrowing. Well, there was that blue van. Not a delivery van, mind you, just an older model. Parked down the street sometimes. Didn't think anything of it at the time, but after, well, you start to remember everything, don't you? A blue van. It wasn't in the original reports Ginny had seen. Either the detail was too vague for the original investigators, or it was indeed a missed piece of information. Ginny made a mental note, her internal pattern recognition software whirring. Blue van, older model, parked down the street. Her next visit was to the Andersons, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas and Brenda, who lived directly across the street. Mr. Anderson, a gruff but kind man in his late 80s, remembered the night vividly. Sounded like a ruckus, he rasped, his voice rough with age. Thought it was just the kids playing too loud at first. Then the sirens. Brenda, quieter, then spoke. Thomas, remember that handyman? The one who did work for the McGowans and for us too sometimes? Mr. Anderson squinted. Oh yeah, what was his name? Ray, I think? He was a bit shifty, always asking questions, seemed to me, about what folks had, how long they were gone. Never liked him much. This was new. A handyman asking questions. Ginny's senses sharpened. This wasn't just a general observation, it was a specific person. Do you remember his full name or where he lived? The Andersons struggled, their memories of Ray hazy, limited to a first name and a general sense of unease. Ginny didn't push. She instead asked about the McGowans' routines, their friends, any disputes they might have had. Finn, during this exchange, had his head cocked, his gaze fixed intently on Mr. Anderson when he described Ray, as if picking up on the lingering distrust in the old man's voice. A subtle shift in Mr. Anderson's posture, a slight clenching of his jaw, was Ginny's cue that there was an unresolved emotional residue around this. Ginny spent the next few days systematically contacting the remaining names on her list. Each conversation was a delicate balance of active listening, gentle probing, and allowing space for memories to surface naturally. She found that some remembered nothing, others only the trauma, but a few, like Mrs. Vance and the Andersons, offered fragmented pieces. A dog barking unusually that night, a vague description of a car, a recurring person who seemed out of place. No single piece was a smoking gun, but collectively they began to form a nascent pattern. Her psychology background kicked in, analyzing not just what people said, but how they said it. The hesitation before detail, the nervous laugh, the subtle defensiveness. These were the tells that her hypervigilance picked up, and that Finn often mirrored with a slight shift of his weight or a focused stare. It was like piecing together a mosaic where half the tiles were missing and the remaining ones were covered in dust. She had two new leads, an older model blue van and a shifty handyman named Ray. Neither was concrete, but they were threads. And for a cold case detective like Ginny O'Malley, a single thread was all she needed to start unraveling a decades-old mystery. The original police reports hadn't had these details, which meant Ginny was already treading on new ground. She felt a familiar hum of anticipation, the quiet thrill of the hunt, as she prepared to dig into these new fragile leads. The threads of Ray the handyman and the blue van might be thin, but for Ginny, they represented the potential for new, previously unexplored avenues. The challenge was bridging the nearly 50-year gap to identify businesses that would have been operating in Little Rock in 1975, especially those that might employ handymen or utilize blue vans. Her initial approach was to cast a wide net. She started by researching general contractors, repair services, and even local moving companies that existed in Little Rock during the mid-70s. This meant digging into old city directories. Thankfully, the Little Rock Public Library had a decent archive, and even antiquated phone books. She scoured archived newspaper advertisements, looking for handyman services or odd job ads. It was like sifting through digital dust, but Ginny knew the value of patience. Process was slow. Many small businesses from that era were long defunct, their records lost to time, or simply never formalized. Even if a business still existed under a similar name, its ownership, management, and employee records from 1975 would be incredibly difficult to access. Privacy laws, even for past employees, further complicated matters. While the handyman lead was her primary focus for employee records, the blue van offered a different, albeit trickier, path. She knew that simply searching for blue van was a needle in a haystack, but a handyman business owning a blue van? That narrowed it significantly. She considered contacting the Arkansas Office of Motor Vehicles for historical vehicle registration data. The process would be complex due to privacy regulations, but if she could demonstrate a legitimate law enforcement purpose and potentially tie it to specific business names or individuals, she might be able to get limited access. A search for commercial vehicle registrations from that period, particularly for vans, might offer a breakthrough. Ginny also considered other less direct angles. Who else would have used vans or employed general laborers on a freelance basis in the early to mid to 70s? Utility companies, gas, electric, water, and telephone companies often employed their own crews or contracted out for various maintenance tasks. Would any of them have used vans of that description or had employees named Ray who might have done side jobs? She'd need to research Central Arkansas Water and Arkansas Power and Light, seeing if any historical records existed or if any long-term employees might remember contract workers from that time. Unfinished construction companies, the neighborhood was new in 1975. Were there any remaining construction companies from that initial development period? They would have employed numerous laborers and perhaps a Ray who freelanced. Unlocal hardware stores, these were often hubs for handymen. Did any of the older, now possibly family-run hardware stores in Little Rock have records of who bought supplies on account or who frequented their establishments looking for work? Ginny created a spreadsheet meticulously logging every business name she found from the 1970s that fit the criteria. For each, she attempted to locate current contact information, hoping that even if the original owner was gone, a successor or a longtime employee might still exist. "Okay, Finn," she murmured, leaning back in her chair, rubbing behind his ears. He let out a contented sigh, his eyes half closed. "This is where the real digging begins. We're looking for ghosts in the records." The Ray lead felt more substantial. A first name combined with a shifty character description gave it a personal dimension. The blue van, while vague, could be a critical corroborating detail if she could link it to a specific person or business. It was a painstaking process, but Ginny knew that cold cases were rarely solved with a single flash of insight. They were solved by relentless, methodical work, by uncovering the forgotten details, and by her unique ability to recognize the patterns that emerged from the accumulated dust of decades. Ginny's methodical search through dusty archives and digital databases eventually yielded a promising lead. After countless dead ends and no records found, she hit a small but significant breakthrough with what was now Energy Arkansas, the successor to Arkansas Power and Light. While the company's internal structures had changed dramatically since 1975, a dedicated long-term employee in their historical records department, intrigued by Ginny's cold case, managed to unearth some key information. "We did use subcontractors for certain types of line work and new installations, especially in expanding neighborhoods like the one you mentioned," a helpful former AP&L supervisor, now in his late 70s, told Ginny over the phone. His memory was like a well-worn ledger, recalling names and faces from decades past. He remembered some of the smaller crews they'd hire on, often for tasks like trenching or setting up new service connections to homes. Ginny secured permission to review their archived job logs for the specific area around the McGowan residence, focusing on the year leading up to and including September 1975. The records were dense, a mix of handwritten entries and early typed forms, but Ginny's patience was legendary. Finn lay quietly beside her desk, a comforting weight, occasionally letting out a soft woof in his sleep as she meticulously cross-referenced addresses and dates. She found several instances of subcontracted work noted in the McGowan's neighborhood. More importantly, After several calls to retired foremen and crew chiefs, she got a name: Ray Jenkins. He wasn't a direct employee of AP&L, but a frequent subcontractor known for his independent nature and willingness to take on smaller jobs that the main crews might deem inefficient. Ray Jenkins, a retired AP&L line worker named Dale, confirmed, his voice raspy from years of shouting over machinery. "Yeah, I remember Ray. He was a piece of work, good at what he did, but always seemed to be looking over his shoulder, if you know what I mean. Had a beat-up blue van, always loaded with tools, extension cords, spools of wire. He'd often park it a few houses down from where he was actually working. Said it was less conspicuous or some such nonsense." Ginny felt a prickle of excitement, her hypervigilance confirming the internal resonance of this information. Blue van, shifty, Ray. The pattern was solidifying. Dale's description of Ray Jenkins' suspicious parking habits resonated with Mrs. Vance's vague recollection of a blue van parked down the street. The Andersons' feeling that Ray was shifty also fit. Dale couldn't provide a last known address for Ray Jenkins. Subcontractors were transient by nature. He moved around a lot, Dale said. Never stayed in one place long, far as I recall. Paycheck to paycheck, I suppose. Ginny then focused on the records of jobs assigned to Ray Jenkins. She found a work order dated just 3 weeks before the MC Gowan murders for a minor service connection issue on a house 2 streets over from the Missy Gowans. This put Ray Jenkins squarely in the neighborhood, likely familiarizing himself with its layout and routines. Now she had a full name, Ray Jenkins. The blue van was confirmed. The shifty nature was corroborated. This wasn't just a random Ray. This was the Ray. Her next challenge was to track down Ray Jenkins. If he was still alive, he'd be an old man, perhaps with a long-forgotten past. If he was dead, she'd need to find out when and how, and where his life might have taken him after 1975. This was the real cold case work, following a thread from nearly half a century ago and hoping it hadn't completely frayed. Ginny felt Finn stir, his head lifting, his intelligent eyes meeting hers. He seemed to sense the shift in her focus, the renewed intensity. The hunt was truly on. Tracking down a man named Ray Jenkins from nearly 50 years ago was a monumental task, but Ginny thrived on such challenges. Her first step was to leverage what little she had: his full name and the approximate period he worked for AP&L as a subcontractor. She started by attempting to obtain more formal employment records. While AP&L had been helpful with the job logs, getting detailed HR records from decades past was often a legal and logistical nightmare. However, with persistent inquiries and a clear explanation of the cold case, Ginny managed to access a limited set of subcontractor records, which, crucially, included a date of birth for Raymond M. Jenkins, July 4th, 1925. Now, with a full name and a specific date of birth, Ginny's search became far more targeted. She turned to public records databases, which aggregate information from various sources, including census data, death records, and sometimes even old address directories. The search yielded several Ray Jenkins matches, but only one with a birth date that aligned closely: a Raymond M. Jenkins born in 1925. The records indicated he had moved around Arkansas and eventually out of state. The public records also provided a death date, March 23, 2002, in California. This was a significant piece of information. Ray Jenkins was no longer alive, meaning Ginny wouldn't be able to interview him directly. However, his death meant there might be an obituary, a digital footprint left by family members, or even a public memorial. Ginny then shifted her focus to online search engines and social media platforms. While Ray Jenkins himself wouldn't have had a social media presence, his children or other relatives might. Searching for Raymond M. Jenkins and his birth year, combined with obituary or family, she began to find more results. One particular hit stood out: a memorial page on a popular genealogy website. It was dedicated to Raymond M. Ray Jenkins. The page included details consistent with what Ginny had gathered: born in Arkansas, a mention of his profession, and even listed his surviving family members, including 3 daughters: Kay Frances, Phyllis Jean, and Teresa Ray. Ginny's internal radar hummed. This was more than just a match, it was a good match. The existence of multiple daughters suggested a larger family network, and the specific names provided a new avenue for investigation. With the names of the daughters, Ginny moved to social media. She performed targeted searches for Kay Frances Jenkins, Phyllis Jean Jenkins, and Teresa Ray Jenkins, adding Arkansas or California to narrow the results, considering where their father had lived and died. It was a painstaking process, filtering through common names. Finally, she found a promising profile, a woman named Teresa R. Jenkins, whose public profile included photographs that, though clearly contemporary, showed a strong family resemblance to older photos of Ray Jenkins Ginny had seen in an archive newspaper clipping about AP&L subcontractors. The profile also indicated her age was consistent with being born in the late 1960s or early 1970s, making her Ray Jenkins' daughter. The profile didn't reveal much about her current location or personal details, but it was a solid lead. Ginny now had a direct familial link to Ray the handyman in the blue van. While Ray himself was gone, his family might hold pieces of the puzzle he left behind, fragments of memory, old stories, or even objects that could shed light on his life in 1970s Little Rock, and crucially, his activities around September 1975. Finn, who had been dozing, stretched languidly, then rested his chin on Ginny's knee, looking up at her with his intelligent eyes. He seemed to sense the shift in her focus, the subtle but undeniable triumph. The ghost of Ray Jenkins was beginning to take shape. The sun dipped low over the McGowan's backyard, painting the familiar scene in hues of orange and fading gold. Ray Jenkins, feigning a final check on a newly installed connection pole at the alley's edge, watched. Jennifer, Missy Gowan, her laughter a bright, irritating counterpoint to the quiet evening, sat on a blanket, her children nestled close. He watched as Sarah, the little girl, fiddled with the silver locket at her mother's throat. "Mommy, open it again." She'd pipe, her voice clear in the still air. Jennifer would smile, a soft, indulgent look, and click open the tiny locket. "See, Sweet Pea, that's you and Jackie always right here." Sarah would trace the tiny, faded faces inside, utterly captivated. Ray felt a familiar cold clench in his chest. Always right here, a belonging he'd never known, a piece of a perfect, unbroken circle he coveted and loathed in equal measure. Then, Patrick Missy Gowan joined them, settling onto the blanket. Jack, the boy, immediately gravitated to his father's side, his small fingers reaching for the watch on Patrick's wrist. "Tick-tock, Daddy's watch." Jack would giggle, holding it to his ear. Patrick would chuckle, pulling the boy close. "That's right, son. My granddad gave me this. Keeps time for all the important things." Ray's mouth thinned. Important things. Like grandfathers and sons and time spent together. He remembered the ticking silence of his own youth, the time stretching empty and endless. Jennifer, meanwhile, had been reading from a thick, well-loved book, the same one she'd pressed the yellow wildflower into earlier, and the little bear knew, no matter how far he roamed, his heart was always with his family. She read, her voice warm and steady. She gently smoothed the page, and Ray caught a glimpse of the pressed flower, a faded yellow against the aged paper. "Grandma Lily used to say," Jennifer mused softly, holding up a small, intricately woven piece of lace that marked her page, "that love is like lace. Tiny threads woven together, getting stronger with every knot." Lace, Ray thought, a dark satisfaction blooming in his chest. Threads. Knots. He saw the way the children looked at these small objects, the locket, the watch, the flower, the lace, as if they held the very essence of their happiness, their unbreakable bonds. He saw the easy, thoughtless way they were displayed, treasured, spoken of. He knew then, with chilling clarity, what he would take. Not the television, not the few bills in a wallet. No, he would take the whispers. He would take the echoes of their love, the tangible pieces of their connection. He would take the locket that held their faces, the watch that marked their time, the flower that symbolized their joy, and the lace that spoke of generations of love. He would sever those threads, break those knots, and leave behind only the silence he knew so well. Ginny sent a carefully worded message to Teresa R. Jenkins, identifying herself as a detective working a cold case from 1975 in Little Rock that her father, Raymond M. Jenkins, might have had some incidental knowledge of, given his work in the area. She avoided any mention of suspicion, focusing purely on gathering historical context. To her surprise, Teresa responded within a day. After a brief phone conversation where Ginny reiterated her professional but empathetic approach, Teresa agreed to a video call, bringing her sister Phyllis into the conversation as well. The call was a delicate dance. Ginny listened as Teresa and Phyllis spoke of their father, Ray. They confirmed he was a lineman, and indeed, his work often took him away from home for extended periods. He was always on the road, Phyllis recalled, a slight wistfulness in her voice. Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, even Texas sometimes. Wherever the big jobs were, or where a company needed extra hands for a while. They confirmed the blue van, remembering it as a constant fixture of their childhoods, always packed with tools and smelling faintly of oil and dust. They didn't know much about his life when he was away working. He didn't talk much about his jobs, or what he did when he was out of town, Teresa explained. Just that he was working hard to provide for us. This transient lifestyle, combined with the nature of his work, provided both a plausible explanation for his movements and a potential veil for darker activities. Ginny's psychological training told her that individuals with a drive for control or violence often seek professions that offer anonymity and mobility. Then came the unexpected revelation. After Daddy passed, Teresa began, her voice a little hesitant. We were cleaning out his old shed in the backyard. Underneath some old planks, there was this box. It was a metal toolbox, but it didn't have tools in it, just odd things. Phyllis picked up the narrative. Yeah, really weird stuff. Little trinkets mostly. Some old jewelry we didn't recognize, buttons, a dried flower, some foreign coins. We figured he collected them, or maybe they were little souvenirs from his travels. Didn't make much sense to us, but we held on to it. It's still in the attic if you want to see it. Ginny's internal alarm bells went off. A hidden box of odd items collected by a man with a transient lifestyle, present in the vicinity of a violent crime. Her intuition, honed by her hypervigilance and understanding of criminal psychology, screamed trophies. Serial offenders often collected souvenirs from their victims, not for monetary value, but for the psychological satisfaction of reliving the crime or maintaining a sense of power over their victims. The fact that the items were hidden suggested a knowledge of their illicit nature. Yes, Ginny said, her voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. I would very much like to see that box. It could be incredibly important to the case. The sisters readily agreed, sensing the gravity in Ginny's tone. They offered to mail it, but Ginny insisted on collecting it in person, wanting to control the chain of custody and observe their reactions when handling the box. As Ginny ended the call, a chilling hypothesis began to form with startling clarity in her mind. If Ray Jenkins was indeed the McGowan's killer, and if this souvenir box was what she suspected, then the MC Gowan murders might not be an isolated incident. A transient lineman with a blue van traveling across state lines for decades, taking trophies from his victims. The pattern pointed towards something far more sinister than a single home invasion gone wrong. Ginny began to consider the terrifying possibility that Ray Jenkins was not just a murderer, but a serial killer, his victims scattered across the South, their cases perhaps still cold and unsolved in forgotten files. The MC Gowan case then might just be the key to unlocking a string of long-hidden atrocities. Ginny arranged to fly out to California herself, given the sensitive nature of the trophy box and the need to maintain an unbroken chain of custody. Shipping it was out of the question. Besides, she wanted to meet Teresa and Phyllis in person, to observe them and to gather any further nuances that might arise from face-to-face interaction. Finn, naturally, accompanied her. The sisters lived in a modest, well-kept house in a quiet California suburb. Teresa, a woman in her late 50s with kind eyes, greeted Ginny warmly, Finn wagging his tail gently at her approach. Phyllis, a few years older, was more reserved but equally accommodating. Over coffee, they spoke more about their father. He was a good dad, really, Teresa stated, looking at Phyllis for confirmation. He just wasn't around much. Always off on a job. Phyllis nodded. He'd come home, sometimes for a few weeks, sometimes just for a weekend. He was always tired, but he loved us. We knew that. He just had this drive to work. Ginny listened intently. Her psychological training reminded her that a positive parental relationship didn't negate the possibility of a hidden, darker life. Abusers often maintained a facade of normalcy, especially within their families, while externalizing their true pathology. The good dad narrative, though heartfelt from the daughters, didn't entirely quiet Ginny's growing suspicions. Finn, observing the sisters, remained calm, sensing no deception in their recounting of their relationship with their father, only genuine affection and a touch of melancholy for a distant parent. Finally, Teresa led Ginny to the attic. It was dusty but organized. Tucked away in a corner was an old, rusted metal toolbox. Teresa handled it carefully, handing it over to Ginny with a slight shiver. "This is it. We just never really knew what to make of it." Ginny took the box, the weight of it in her hands strangely significant. It felt less like a collection of random trinkets and more like a carefully curated assortment. She examined the lock, rusted solid, indicating it hadn't been opened in years. With the sisters' written permission, she carefully pried it open back at her hotel room later that evening. Inside, nestled on yellowed cotton batting, were the odd items. A tarnished silver locket, too small for an adult. A single pearl earring, a button intricately carved from bone. A dried pressed wildflower, its petals still retaining a faded hue. A small, intricately woven piece of lace. A few foreign coins worn smooth. Each item, to the casual observer, seemed innocuous. But Ginny's intuition, reinforced by her knowledge of trophy-taking, screamed otherwise. These weren't souvenirs from tourist traps. They were personal, intimate fragments of lives. She meticulously photographed each item, noting its condition and any identifying marks. This was forensic evidence now, with the potential to link Ray Jenkins to other cold cases. Her next critical step was to present these items to Sarah and Jack M.C. Gowan. Now adults in their early 50s, they were the last best hope for identifying anything connected to their parents. It was a sensitive undertaking. Ginny knew she had to prepare them to explain the potential, however painful, of what they might see. Ginny contacted Sarah, who lived in Dallas, and Jack, who resided in Houston. Both had forged lives far from Little Rock, though the tragedy of their childhood undoubtedly lingered. She explained the new lead, the discovery of Ray Jenkins in the box of items. She emphasized the possibility that the items might not be relevant, but that it was a necessary step. After careful consideration, both agreed to a virtual meeting, understanding the importance of the potential breakthrough. Ginny arranged a secure video conference. She would present the items one by one, watching their reactions, searching for any flicker of recognition, any emotional cue that Finn, sitting beside her, might also pick up on. This wasn't just about identifying objects, it was about connecting to memories suppressed by decades of trauma. The trophy box was open, and the ghosts of the past were about to speak, if only through the fragile recollections of two orphaned children. Flashback to Ray Jenkins working, observing the McGowan family, the late afternoon sun, golden and long, slanted across the McGowan's backyard. Ray Jenkins, parked a few houses down on the quiet residential street, pretended to fuss with the tools in the back of his blue van. He wasn't really seeing the corroded wiring or the bent pliers. His gaze was locked on the scene unfolding in the vibrant green square of lawn. Jennifer Massey Gowan, her hair tied back with a scarf, hummed a tuneless song as she worked in a flower bed, her movements fluid, content. Her laughter, light and airy, carried on the breeze as the two children, Sarah and Jack, chased each other across the grass, their shrieks of joy like tiny, sharp needles in Ray's ears. He remembered empty afternoons, the clatter of his own footsteps in an echoing house, the silence that pressed in. Jennifer finally sat back on her heels, wiping dirt from her brow. She picked a single wildflower, its petals a cheerful yellow. Ray watched, mesmerized by the simple, tender gesture, as she carried it to a small, worn book she kept on a wrought iron table by the back door. She carefully opened the book, pressing the flower between its pages, as if preserving a moment of delicate beauty. Then she gathered her children, pulling Sarah onto her lap, Jack settling beside them on the picnic blanket. She opened the same book, not to the pressed flower, but to its pages, and began to read aloud. Her voice was soft, rhythmic, weaving a spell over the children. Sarah, her small fingers idly tracing the contours of the silver locket that rested at her mother's throat, fiddled with the clasp. Ray could just make out the glint as the locket opened, revealing two tiny faded photographs inside, the children themselves, a testament to belonging. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, Patrick M.C. Gowan emerged from the house. He moved with an easy grace, settling beside his family, his arm finding its natural place around Jennifer's shoulders. He leaned in, listening to her read, a peaceful smile gracing his lips. Jack, restless even in quiet contentment, took his father's hand and began to trace the face of the watch on his wrist, a simple, gold-faced piece, as if finding comfort in its steady ticking. Ray watched it all, the easy affection, the shared laughter, the intimate gestures, the locket, the watch, the book with its pressed flower. This wasn't just a family, it was an unbroken circle, a perfect, self-contained world of belonging and warmth that Ray had only ever glimpsed from the outside, always the lineman, the observer. A cold, hard knot formed in his gut, a familiar resentment curling into a simmering rage. He closed the back of his van with a soft click that no one heard over the gentle hum of the evening. They leave these things out in the open, he thought, his mind already shifting from observation to acquisition. These small, perfect pieces, they leave them there for anyone to see and to take. The screen flickered, and the faces of Sarah and Jack M.C. Gowan appeared, looking understandably tense. Sarah, with her striking resemblance to the faded photos of her mother, was in her mid-50s now. Jack, a few years younger, had his father's serious eyes. They were strangers yet inextricably linked by the horrific event that had defined their childhoods, an event they had only narrowly escaped by being away at retreat that fateful September. Ginny introduced herself formally, then quickly moved to the purpose of the call, explaining the discovery of Ray Jenkins and the context of the trophy box. She acknowledged the difficulty of what she was about to do. Finn, sensing the delicate atmosphere, lay quietly by Ginny's feet, his gaze occasionally shifting between Ginny and the screen, his ears twitching subtly as he processed the nuances of the human voices. "I'm going to show you a series of items," Ginny began, her voice calm and steady. "Please take your time. There's no pressure to recognize anything, but if something, anything, at all, sparks a memory, no matter how fleeting, please tell me." She held up the first item, the tarnished silver locket. It was small, unassuming, with a simple floral engraving. Sarah's breath hitched. Jack leaned closer to the screen. "That locket," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with a fragile recognition. "It looks exactly like the one Mom wore. All the time. She never took it off. It had a picture of me and Jack inside. My grandmother gave it to her." Her voice was thick with emotion, a mix of disbelief and dawning horror. Ginny nodded, her gaze fixed on Sarah. Finn's tail gave a single, almost imperceptible thump against the floor. He hadn't reacted dramatically, but Ginny knew the subtle shift in Sarah's breathing, the sudden focus in her eyes spoke volumes. Next, Ginny held up a man's watch. It was an older model, a simple leather band with a slightly scuffed rectangular gold face. Jack stared at it, his brow furrowed in concentration. That's Dad's watch," he breathed, his voice barely audible. "He wore it every day. I remember playing with the clasp when he'd hold me. It was his good luck charm, he used to say." A tear tracked down Jack's cheek. The bone button was next. It was small, with a distinct, almost rustic carving. Neither Sarah nor Jack immediately recognized it, but Ginny observed their fleeting expressions, a momentary curiosity, then dismissal. Then came the dried, pressed wildflower. It was a common variety, perhaps a simple daisy or a coneflower, its vibrant colors long faded to muted browns and yellows. Sarah gasped. "That flower!" she exclaimed, tears welling in her eyes. "My mom." She loved to press flowers. She had a little book, a big dictionary. She pressed them in. She always said this one was her favorite because it grew wild by the creek near our house. This was a stronger hit. The specificity of the memory was powerful. It wasn't just a generic flower, it was her mother's favorite, connected to a specific location. Finally, Ginny presented the small, intricately woven piece of lace. It looked like a fragment from an edging or a doily. Jack leaned forward again. My grandmother, on my mom's side, he said slowly, she used to make lace. She made doilies for all the tables, and lace trim for things. That looks like her work. I remember that pattern. Ginny felt a profound sense of validation. The locket and the watch, irrefutably identified by the children, were the undeniable proof. 3 additional items, strongly linked to Jennifer or her family, solidified the connection. This wasn't a random collection. This was a personal inventory of their parents' lives. Thank you, Ginny said, her voice softer than usual. This information is incredibly valuable. It confirms a strong connection to your parents. The call ended with a mixture of grief and a fragile hope from Sarah and Jack. Ginny promised to keep them updated, to finally bring them the answers they had waited decades for. She didn't reveal the true scope of the box's contents. The 27 meticulously curated items, each a silent testament to a family destroyed, likely in the various states Ray Jenkins had worked. That would come later, when the patterns of his monstrous life fully emerged. As the screen went dark, Ginny sat back, the weight of the moment settling over her. Finn, sensing her internal shift from focused intensity to profound emotional realization, nudged her hand with his nose, then rested his head on her lap. Ginny stroked his soft fur, her mind racing. The trophy box was precisely what she had feared, and precisely what she needed. Ray Jenkins was indeed the McGowan's killer. But the broader, terrifying implication remained. These were intensely personal items, not generic valuables. If Ray Jenkins had collected such deeply sentimental objects from the McGowans, it stood to reason he had done so with others. His transient life as a lineman, the blue van, the hidden box filled with 27 pieces of evidence, Ginny's pattern recognition was now working overtime, not just on the McGowan case, but on a much larger, horrifying tapestry. She had to cross-reference Ray Jenkins' movements and work history with other cold cases, with similar patterns of home invasion, with victims from across the South who had disappeared or been murdered without a clear motive. The MC Gowan murders were solved, yes, but they were now the entry point into a potential series of decades-old interstate atrocities. The true scope of Raymond M. Jenkins's evil was only just beginning to unfold. The return trip to California felt heavier than the first for Ginny. The initial visit had been about gathering information. This one would be about delivering a devastating truth. Teresa and Phyllis, unsuspecting, greeted her with the same cautious warmth as before. Finn, sensing the shift in Ginny's demeanor, remained closer to her side, his body language mirroring her quiet intensity. Ginny sat them down, the trophy box placed carefully on the coffee table between them. She began by reiterating the confirmed identification of the locket and watch by Sarah and Jack M.C. Gowan. Teresa gasped, and Phyllis covered her mouth with a trembling hand. The reality of their father's involvement in the 1975 murders settled heavily in the room. "There's more," Ginny said, her voice gentle but firm, her eyes meeting theirs. "When I processed the box, I found not just your parents' items, but 25 other unique pieces. Each one appears to be a personal memento, similar to the locket and watch." She explained her theory, the concept of a serial offender collecting trophies, and the grim implications of Ray's transient work as a lineman across multiple states. It suggests that the MC Gowan murders may not have been an isolated incident, but part of a much larger pattern. The sisters stared at her, their faces pale with shock. The good dad they remembered was crumbling before their eyes, replaced by the terrifying image of a predator. Tears welled in Teresa's eyes. "No, Daddy wouldn't," she began, but her voice trailed off, unable to form the denial. Phyllis, ever the more pragmatic, spoke, her voice strained. "Are you saying our father was a serial killer?" The words hung in the air, cold and stark. "Based on the evidence in this box and his movements, it's a very strong possibility," Ginny confirmed, her empathy radiating but unwavering in her duty. His pattern of work allowed him to move across state lines, to new towns where no one knew him, leaving no connections behind. She allowed them a moment to process the horrifying revelation. Finn, sensing their distress, whined softly, leaning against Ginny's leg. "I understand this is incredibly difficult," Ginny continued, "but to bring justice to these other potential victims, I need your help. Your father was known to work in Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. Do you have any old photos, diaries, work schedules, or even just stories that might give me a more precise timeline of his whereabouts? Any names of foremen, work buddies, or even specific towns where he spent more time? Teresa, wiping her eyes, nodded slowly. He had some old work notebooks and a calendar, I think. We kept them with his things, Phyllis added. And there's Uncle Frank. He worked with Daddy on some jobs early on, before he settled down. He might remember more specifics or other guys Dad worked with. Ginny felt a surge of professional relief mixed with sadness for the daughters. This information was crucial. Any relative, any friend who knew him during those years could be vital, she urged. Even vague recollections of where he might have been or who he associated with could help me narrow down the search for other victims and finally bring closure to more families. The sisters, though reeling, understood the immense implications. Their father, a quiet lineman, was now a suspect in a decades-long reign of terror. It was a truth they would carry forever, but perhaps also a chance to contribute to a grim kind of justice. Ginny had opened the trophy box, and now its dark contents were ready to expose a wider web of forgotten crimes. Back in Little Rock, the trophy box secured in evidence. Ginny immediately followed up on the leads provided by Teresa and Phyllis. The daughters, though shattered by the revelation, had been remarkably cooperative, providing her with a small, worn box containing Ray Jenkins's old work notebooks and a couple of tattered calendars. They also supplied contact information for their Uncle Frank, Ray's brother, and a few other distant relatives who might have known him during his more active working years. Ginny tackled the notebooks first. They were filled with terse, almost indecipherable notations, dates, job codes, company names, and locations. Sometimes just a city and state, other times a vague address or intersection. It was a dizzying mosaic of a transient life. Her hypervigilance, usually so beneficial, now had to be carefully managed to avoid overwhelming her with the sheer volume of fragmented data. She cross-referenced every entry with historical maps and news archives, meticulously plotting Ray's movements across Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas throughout the 1970s and 80s. Finn, ever her steadfast companion, often rested his head on her lap as she worked, his calm presence a grounding force amidst the swirling data. Concurrently, Ginny began reaching out to the other relatives. Uncle Frank, a laconic man living in rural Louisiana, was a goldmine of information, albeit delivered in slow, deliberate sentences. He confirmed working with Ray on several large-scale projects, recalling specific construction sites and the names of a few other linemen they'd shared digs with. Ray was always off on his own. Mostly, Frank drawled over the phone, his voice weathered by years outdoors. Good worker, but kept to himself. Never joined us for poker nights. Said he had other business. Ginny noted the subtle emphasis on other business, a common phrase that, in this context, now chilled her. Frank also mentioned a few specific small towns where Ray would hole up between bigger jobs, places Ginny quickly added to her expanding spreadsheet. The distant cousins provided less direct work information, but painted a fuller picture of Ray's personality. A quiet man, polite but distant, never truly settling anywhere, even during family gatherings. His blue van, they recalled, was always meticulously maintained, almost a point of pride, even as his clothes grew grubbier. As Ginny pieced together this fragmented timeline, her pattern recognition began to connect disparate points. She looked for clusters of time Ray spent in specific, smaller communities, especially those that didn't align with major power grid projects. She searched for periods where his work schedule showed unexplained gaps or unusual travel between jobs. These could be the windows, the opportunities. With these refined timelines and locations, Ginny began the painstaking process of cross-referencing. She contacted cold case units and police departments across the states Ray had frequented, using the dates and locations she'd painstakingly mapped out. She inquired about unsolved home invasions, unidentifiable bodies, or mysterious disappearances from the 1970s and 80s that fit a similar modus operandi to the MC Gowan murders. She knew it was a shot in the dark, but it was a calculated one. The task was daunting. The number of cold cases from that era was immense, and many police departments lacked dedicated cold case units or the resources to conduct extensive cross-referencing. But Ginny persevered, driven by the images of the locket and the watch, and the chilling knowledge of the 25 other silent items in the box. Each lead, no matter how small, felt like a step closer to identifying another family torn apart by Ray Jenkins, a step closer to breaking a silence that had lasted for decades. The weeks that followed were a grueling cycle of research, phone calls, and cross-referencing. Ginny felt like a human algorithm sifting through decades of forgotten crime. She'd found several cold cases that vaguely fit the profile: home invasions, unexplained disappearances, but nothing with a truly compelling connection to Ray Jenkins's specific pattern or presence. Many departments were slow to respond, or simply didn't have the digital records to assist her efficiently. Then a breakthrough from Louisiana. Ginny had identified a period in early 1973 where Ray Jenkins's work logs showed an extended contract in a cluster of small towns along the Mississippi River just west of Baton Rouge. She focused on one town in particular, Bayou Belle, Louisiana, where Ray had spent nearly 3 months on a significant utility upgrade project. A call to the Louisiana State Police Cold Case Unit led her to Detective Mark Boudreau, a seasoned investigator with a wary but dedicated voice. Ginny explained her theory, the trophy box, and the specific dates Ray Jenkins was in Bayou Belle. She held her breath, hoping. Bayou Belle, 1973, you say? Boudreau's voice had lost some of its weariness. We've got one. The Dubois family, July 12, 1973. Parents, Marie and Henri Dubois, found dead in their home. 2 children, twins aged 8, were found unharmed, hidden in a closet. Never had a solid lead. Thought it was a random robbery, but nothing valuable was taken. Ginny felt a chilling wave of recognition. Parents murdered, children found unharmed. Nothing valuable taken. The pattern. It was identical to the MC Gowan case. Her hypervigilance, usually a shield, now prickled with the cold certainty of recognition. Did they take anything unusual from the Dubois home, Detective? Ginny asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Boudreau consulted his file. The original report notes the strange absence of a few personal trinkets. Marie Dubois' wedding locket, a small silver cross Henri always wore. Things of sentimental value, not monetary. Ginny's gaze instinctively darted to the secured trophy box sitting in her office. She knew with a certainty that prickled her skin that some of those items belonged to the Dubois family. The locket, the small silver cross, they were in there. She shared the specific details of Ray Jenkins' presence in Bayou Belle, his blue van, and the shifty character descriptions. Boudreau was instantly on board, recognizing the profound significance of her findings. Over the next few days, Ginny and Boudreau collaborated intensely. Ginny provided detailed analyses of Ray's movements, focusing on the specific window of the Dubois murders. She then sent high-resolution images of the items from her trophy box. Detective Boudreau secured a meeting with the Dubois twins, now adults, much like Sarah and Jack M.C. Gowan. The identification was swift and heartbreaking. The Dubois siblings, through tears and a wave of fresh trauma, recognized their mother's locket and their father's silver cross among the items Ginny sent. The pattern was undeniable. Ginny's work was no longer just about solving cold cases, it was about unmasking a monster. She spent days meticulously documenting Ray Jenkins's early life, digging through sparse records, talking to any distant relative who might shed light on his childhood. What she found, piecemeal, began to paint a grim picture. Ray's parents were alcoholics, frequently absent, often leaving him to fend for himself or be shuffled between relatives. His early years were marked by emotional neglect and instances of severe physical trauma, leaving deep, unhealed wounds. Her psychological expertise helped her connect the dots. Ray Jenkins, a man deeply scarred by a profoundly neglectful and traumatic childhood, had developed a twisted rage. He likely harbored an unconscious, seething resentment towards what he perceived as perfect or picture-perfect families, the stable, loving home environments that he had been denied. The intact family unit, a present mother and father with children seemingly happy and complete, became his target. He didn't want their valuables. He wanted to destroy the very image of the idyllic family he never had. The trophies weren't just mementos of his crimes. They were symbolic fragments ripped from the lives he extinguished, proof of his perverse power. over the very thing he coveted and simultaneously despised. The MC Gowan and Dubois cases were chillingly similar, not just in their execution, but in their motive. Ginny now had a clear, albeit horrifying, psychological profile of Raymond M. Jenkins. He wasn't just a murderer. He was a serial killer driven by a deep-seated pathological rage against the family unit. The hunt for his other victims was no longer just a methodical search. It was a race against time, a desperate effort to find closure for countless other families whose tragedies had remained unsolved for far too long. The confirmation of the Dubois case solidified Ginny's theory, but it also propelled her into a more intensive deep dive into Ray Jenkins's past. Her goal wasn't just to identify more victims, but to understand the genesis of the monster. She needed more than just fragmented recollections. She needed context. Leveraging her badge and a clear explanation of the ongoing multi-state serial killer investigation, Ginny secured access to more sensitive historical records. She unearthed birth records, sparse school attendance sheets from various small towns in Arkansas where Ray's family briefly settled, and even some juvenile court documents from a minor truancy charge in his early teens. What emerged was a stark, disturbing pattern of instability. Ray Jenkins's childhood was a carousel of neglect. His mother, an itinerant worker with a severe alcohol problem, drifted from town to town, often leaving young Ray in the care of distant, often indifferent, relatives for weeks or months at a time. His father was largely absent, a name on a birth certificate, but little more. School records showed frequent transfers, missed days, and notes from teachers indicating a withdrawn, quiet boy who rarely engaged. There were whispers in the family about him often being left alone, locked out of houses, or scrounging for food. His early adolescence brought a brief stint in a reform school for petty theft, a direct consequence of his unsupervised upbringing. Ginny consulted with a former FBI profiler she knew, a retired colleague from a cold case seminar. It fits the classic profile of a disorganized killer, fueled by deep-seated trauma, the profiler explained. The inability to form secure attachments in childhood often leads to a profound rage, a desperate need for control, and a targeting of what they perceive as stable, happy units. Everything they lacked. The collecting of trophies is about re-exerting that control, reliving the moment of power over what they hate and crave. The details of Ray's young adulthood were equally transient. He enlisted in the Army briefly in the late 40s, but records showed he was honorably discharged after less than 2 years, deemed unsuitable for military life, a vague classification that likely masked deeper behavioral issues. He drifted through various manual labor jobs before settling into lineman work, a profession that perfectly accommodated his desire for solitude and mobility. He married, had children, but the familial bonds, while not overtly hostile, were clearly distant, reflecting his own upbringing. Armed with this deeper understanding of Ray Jenkins's pathology and a more refined timeline of his movements, Ginny returned to her ever-expanding spreadsheet. Her focus shifted to another area where Ray had worked a substantial contract. Jonesboro, Arkansas, in the summer of 1970, a few years before the Dubois case. She placed a call to the Jonesboro Police Department. "I'm looking into cold cases from around the summer of 1970, Ginny explained to Detective Wilson, the officer assigned to cold cases there, specifically home invasions where parents were murdered and children were left unharmed, or where sentimental items were taken but not valuables." There was a long pause on the other end. "Detective O'Malley," Wilson finally said, his voice low. "We have a case that fits that description eerily. The Thompson family, July 28, 1970, Michael and Susan Thompson found dead. Their 2 boys, aged 9 and 11, were found hiding under a bed. Nothing of monetary value was taken, but Susan's mother's thimble and Michael's grandfather's pocket knife were missing. We always thought it was a robbery gone wrong, but it never sat right with us." Ginny's breath caught. A thimble, a pocket knife, perfect, intimate, symbolic trophies. The pattern was horrifyingly consistent. "Detective Wilson," Ginny said, her voice firm, "I believe I know who your killer is. And I believe I have the thimble and the pocket knife. The Jonesboro case. It was an earlier one, potentially the earliest example of his full modus operandi Ginny had found so far. It predated Dubois, pushing the timeline of Ray's apparent killing spree back even further. The methodical monster had been active for longer than she'd initially feared. The full scale of his devastation was only just beginning to reveal itself. The Jonesboro match, so eerily similar to the McGowan and Dubois murders, fueled Ginny's determination. If Ray Jenkins had been active as far back as 1970, the true scale of his crimes could be vast. She returned to his meticulously charted work history, now armed with a more refined understanding of his escalating modus operandi and his psychological triggers. Her eyes scanned the entries for the longest, most isolated stints, particularly in states known for their vast, sprawling landscapes where a transient lineman might go unnoticed. One significant stretch of time jumped out, late 1977 to early 1978. Ray Jenkins had spent nearly 5 months on a substantial contract in West Texas, specifically around the Midland-Odessa area, a region dotted with oil fields and small, tight-knit communities. Ginny knew that the distances between towns in West Texas could be immense, providing perfect anonymity for someone looking to vanish between jobs. She contacted the Texas Rangers Cold Case Unit, known for their tenacious pursuit of justice. Ginny outlined her findings, emphasizing the consistent pattern: murdered parents, unharmed children, and the theft of sentimental non-monetary items. She provided Ray Jenkins's name, his blue van, and his detailed movements during that specific time frame. The ranger on the other end, a gravel-voiced veteran named Captain Ramirez, listened intently. "Detective O'Malley," he drawled, "we've got a case that's been gnawing at us for decades out here. The Carson family, January 15th, 1978. A young couple, David and Emily Carson, found shot in their home just outside Odessa. Their 2 daughters, 10 and 13, were discovered unharmed, sleeping in their beds. We never understood why nothing valuable was taken. No jewelry, no cash, no electronics. Just a few odd things." Ginny's heart hammered a familiar beat. "What odd things, Captain?" Ramirez flipped through a digital file. The report mentions a small, hand-painted ceramic bird that sat on Emily Carson's bedside table, and a silver high school football charm David Carson always wore on his keychain. Total mysteries? Ginny closed her eyes briefly, a wave of profound sorrow washing over her. The ceramic bird, the football charm. She knew with chilling certainty exactly where they were. They were nestled among the 27 silent witnesses in the trophy box. "Captain Ramirez?" Ginny said, her voice steady despite the emotional impact. "I believe I have the ceramic bird and the football charm. They were found among personal effects belonging to Raymond M. Jenkins." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Ramirez spoke again, his voice was laced with a raw mix of shock and grim satisfaction. "Well, I'll be damned. Jenkins, you say? A lineman?" Ginny detailed Ray's life, his traumatic childhood, his transience, his pattern of targeting picture-perfect families, the stability and warmth he'd been denied. She explained how the items weren't about monetary gain, but about psychological control, about taking a piece of the life he envied and abhorred. Ramirez understood immediately. "That fits the MO for a deeply disturbed individual, detective. We always thought it was personal, but couldn't place how it was personal to a random home invasion." With the Texas Rangers now a full partner, Ginny's investigation expanded dramatically. The pattern was undeniable: Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas. Ray Jenkins, the unassuming lineman with the beat-up blue van, had been weaving a decades-long trail of murder and heartbreak across the South. The sheer scale of his hidden crimes, slowly unraveling piece by piece from the contents of a single metal box, was a testament to his monstrous precision and Ginny's unyielding dedication to giving voices back to the long-silenced victims. The confirmation from the Texas Rangers following the Louisiana and Jonesboro cases solidified the terrifying scope of Ray Jenkins' hidden life. Ginny's office was now a war room, maps of the southern states tacked to a corkboard, marked with pins indicating Ray's known work stints and the identified murder sites. Finn, sensing the heightened stakes, often lay beneath the map, his watchful eyes occasionally tracking Ginny's movements. Ginny meticulously returned to Ray's early 1970s work history. The Jonesboro murders in July 1970 marked the earliest known instance of his modus operandi. The Dubois family in Louisiana followed in July 1973. There was a significant gap in between, a period where Ray's records showed him working a series of shorter, less significant contracts, primarily within Mississippi. She reached out to the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation Cold Case Unit, specifically targeting the areas where Ray's work logs indicated his presence in 1971 and 1972. She provided them with his name, the consistent pattern of murdered parents, unharmed children, stolen sentimental items, and his blue van. The initial response was slow. Mississippi, like many states, had a backlog of cold cases, but Ginny's persistence, coupled with the detailed evidence she presented, eventually led to a breakthrough. Detective Sarah Bown, a sharp and tenacious MBI investigator, reached back out. Detective O'Malley, Sarah began, her voice tinged with a mix of awe and grim recognition. We've got two. One from 71, one from 72. They always bothered us, but we never had a lead. The Patterson family, Meridian, Mississippi. The first, Sarah continued, is the Patterson family from Meridian. October 27, 1971, Thomas and Clara Patterson, both found dead in their home. Their 3 children, all under 10, were found asleep in their rooms, completely unharmed. The house was ransacked, but the only things missing were Clara's silver ring that was etched with her initials, and a small wooden bird carved by Thomas's grandfather. Ginny felt the now familiar chill. A silver thimble, a wooden bird, personal, not valuable. The children unharmed. The pattern screamed Ray Jenkins. Ray's work logs showed him engaged in a 3-month contract with a regional power cooperative just outside Meridian from August to November 1971. He had been there, immersing himself in the community. The Evans family, Hattiesburg, Mississippi. The second case, Detective Jenkins continued, is the Evans family, Hattiesburg. May 19, 1972, Robert and Martha Evans, both deceased. Their infant daughter, 6 months old, was in her crib, untouched. No forced entry, no valuables taken, just a small hand-stitched sampler Martha had made with the family's names, and Robert's father's military dog tags. A sampler, dog tags, and an infant left completely unharmed, perhaps even overlooked in the killer's rage, or deliberately spared to ensure the family's destruction and the ultimate pain for those left behind. Ray's work records placed him squarely in Hattiesburg from March to June 1972, working on a major substation upgrade. Ginny had the MBI immediately secure the old evidence from both the Patterson and Evans cases. She then sent high-resolution images of the relevant items from the trophy box. Within days, the identification was confirmed. The silver ring, the wooden bird, the hand-stitched sampler, the military dog tags. All of them matched the items reported missing from the Patterson and Evans homes. The Mississippi cases closed another horrifying chapter in Ray Jenkins's hidden spree. The pattern was now undeniable and deeply rooted. In Jonesboro, AR, Thompson family, in Meridian, MS, Patterson family, Hattiesburg, MS, Evans family, Bayou Belle, LA, Dubois family, Little Rock, AR, McGowan family, and TX, Carson family. Ray Jenkins, the seemingly quiet lineman, had systematically targeted what he perceived as perfect families, inflicting the ultimate destruction on the very image of stability he had been denied in his own traumatic childhood. Each collected item in the box was a silent, chilling testament to a life taken, a family shattered, and a cold case finally brought to light. Ginny knew there were still 21 items left in that box, representing many more families waiting for justice. The search for the rest of Ray Jenkins's victims, spread across the South, had only just begun. The mounting evidence from Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas, coupled with the initial Jonesboro and Little Rock cases, painted an increasingly grim picture of Ray Jenkins's methodical devastation. Each pin on Ginny's map now represented shattered lives and decades of unanswered questions. She knew there were still more families waiting for justice, more items in that chilling box needing to be connected. Hot Springs, Arkansas, the Thompson to Clark murders. Ginny turned her attention back to Arkansas, a state Ray frequently traversed. His work log showed a significant contract near Hot Springs, Arkansas, spanning several months in 1976. This period, just after the M.C. Gowan murders in Little Rock, placed him squarely in the area. Hot Springs, a historic resort town, had its own unique rhythm, often attracting visitors. She contacted the Garland County Sheriff's Department. When Ginny described the specific modus operandi, home invasion, parents murdered, children found unharmed, and the theft of sentimental items, the detective on the line, Lieutenant Barnes, immediately pulled up a notorious cold case. "We had a particularly baffling one here, Detective," Barnes stated, his voice tight with lingering frustration. "The Thompson Clark murders, October 22nd, 1976. It was a couple, the Thompsons, and Emily Thompson's visiting brother and sister-in-law, the Clarks. All four were found dead in the Thompsons' home. The Thompsons' kids, teenagers at the time, were away at a football game. Nothing valuable was missing, but a guitar pick and a distinctive fishing lure belonging to the visiting brother were noted as gone. It was a massacre, but it made no sense for a robbery." Ginny's blood ran cold. 4 victims, not just 2 parents, but extended family in a single household. The sheer escalation of violence was alarming, yet the core pattern of stolen sentimentality remained. Ray's rage was expanding, perhaps fueled by a growing confidence or a deeper descent into his pathology. The fact that the children were simply away rather than hidden was also a subtle but important variation. "Lieutenant Barnes," Ginny stated, her voice even, "I believe I have that guitar pick and that fishing lure right here. They belong to Raymond M. Jenkins." The confirmation from Hot Springs was swift and chilling. The pick and the fishing lure, pulled from the trophy box, were positively identified by surviving family members. The sheer brutality of 4 victims indicated a deepening, more unhinged aspect of Ray's pathology. Flashback of Ray Jenkins from his time in Hot Springs in the fall of 1976. The air in Hot Springs, Arkansas was thick with the scent of pine and lake water in the summer of 1976. Ray Jenkins, on a long contract for the power company, found himself drawn again and again to Lake Hamilton. Not for the fishing, which many linemen enjoyed on their off hours, but for the families. He'd seen the Thompson and Clark families there more than once, their 2 boats tied together, laughter echoing across the water. He'd watch from the shore or from his van parked discreetly near a launch ramp. The Thompson kids, a bit older, would splash and joke, while Michael Thompson and Emily's brother, Robert Clark, would cast lines, their faces relaxed in the sun. Emily Thompson and Robert's wife, Susan Clark, would share a thermos of lemonade, their conversation easy, punctuated by smiles. Ray remembered hot, lonely afternoons as a child, the silence of an empty house, the gnawing hunger that was more than just for food. They had it all, effortlessly. The very air around them vibrated with a kind of simple, sun-drenched happiness that felt like a direct affront to him. He noted Robert Clark's practiced flick of the wrist as he cast, a favored, shiny fishing lure arcing perfectly into the water. Always together, Ray thought, a familiar heat beginning to prickle behind his eyes. Always connected, he saw them too back in town. He'd drive by the Thompson house, a pleasant, lived-in home with flowers spilling from window boxes. He'd see them on their porch swing, talking, laughing. And then there was the night at a local open mic. He'd just finished grabbing a bite at a diner, and the music had drifted out into the street. He found himself drawn to the doorway of the small, brightly lit venue. There, on a makeshift stage, was Michael Thompson, strumming a guitar, a comfortable rhythm flowing from his fingers. The whole family was there. Jennifer and the kids, Robert and Susan Clark, gathered around a small table singing along to familiar tunes. The children, even the teenagers, leaned on their parents, laughing at an inside joke, their faces alight with uninhibited joy. Michael, after a particularly good strumming, had reached down, pulling a brightly colored guitar pick from his pocket, tossing it playfully to his son. They share everything, Ray thought, a bitter taste filling his mouth. Their laughter, their songs, even their little pieces of happiness, the sound of their collective harmony, The sight of their easy intimacy was a sharp blade twisting inside him. It wasn't just the two parents anymore, it was the whole unit, expanded, solidified. It was everything he'd never had. He saw the fishing lure, the guitar pick, small personal objects imbued with the very essence of their shared, perfect existence. They weren't just tokens of a hobby, they were symbols of connection, of shared passion, of a life he had been denied. He slipped away from the open mic night, the harmonious music following him, an unbearable torment. The knot in his gut tightened. They just leave these things out for anyone to take, he thought, gripping the steering wheel of his blue van, the pieces of their perfect lives. Return to present-day Austin, Texas, the Rodriguez murders. Next, Ginny pivoted back to Texas. Ray's extensive movements in the state were a challenge, but she focused on a period in early to mid to 1977 before his stint in West Texas that resulted in the Carson murders. His logs indicated a project in the burgeoning capital city of Austin, Texas. She reached out to the Austin Police Department's cold case unit, once again detailing her now refined pattern. Sergeant Lena Gura, a meticulous investigator, took the call. "We have a case from that time frame, Detective O'Malley, that always puzzled us," Gura reported, her voice professional but intrigued. "The Rodriguez family, June 10th, 1977. Miguel and Sofia Rodriguez were murdered in their South Austin home. Their 3 young children, all under 10, were found hiding under a bed. Forensics was minimal, and again, nothing of value was taken. The only missing items were a small, handcrafted wooden rosary belonging to Sofia, and Miguel's personalized Zippo lighter, a gift from his father and another family, another set of children left to discover their parents' horrific end. The wooden rosary, the personalized Zippo. These were the echoes Ginny had come to dread, yet sought so relentlessly. "Sergeant Guerra," Ginny affirmed, "I have that rosary and that lighter. They were found among the possessions of Raymond M. Jenkins, a lineman who worked in your area during that time. The identification of the Rodriguez items cemented another piece of Ray's terrifying puzzle. The children, safe but traumatized, mirrored the initial MC Gowan case. The map in Ginny's office was now a constellation of terror. And Jonesboro AR, Thompson family, and Meridian MS, Patterson family, Gettysburg MS, Evans family, Bayou Bella, Dubois family, and Little Rock AR, McGowan family, Hot Springs AR, Thompson Clark murders, Austin TX, Rodriguez family, and Odessa TX, Carson family." The relentless pattern of Ray Jenkins's pathology was undeniable, stretching across states and years. Ginny knew the trophy box still held secrets, more victims waiting to be identified. But with these latest connections, she had enough consistent evidence to begin assembling a full, terrifying criminal profile of Raymond M. Jenkins. It was time to summarize the monster she had unearthed. The house was quiet now, save for the faint, almost imperceptible ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. The struggle was over, swift and brutal, leaving Arthur and Helen Miller silent on their living room floor. Ray Jenkins stood over them, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the familiar surge of perverse satisfaction coursing through him. He looked around the meticulously kept room, at the framed family photos on the mantel, the children's drawings taped to the refrigerator in the kitchen beyond. "Perfect." A small whimper, barely audible, snagged his attention. It came from down the hall. He moved, his heavy work boots silent on the carpet, following the sound. He pushed open a bedroom door, revealing a brightly decorated nursery. 2 small forms, huddled together, were barely visible beneath a colorful quilt in one of the cribs. The Miller children, toddlers, 3 and 5, Ginny would later learn. Ray paused, watching them. Their wide, terrified eyes stared back at him, 2 small, trembling animals caught in a trap. He could hear their ragged breathing, the tiny, muffled sobs. He saw the innocence, the utter helplessness, the raw, uncomprehending fear. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, pricked at him, the cold, empty kitchen, the crumpled math tests, the distant judging laughter from other children. His own small hands, reaching to close the door on the shame. He remembered wishing, with a desperate, childish ferocity, that the world would see what he saw. The mess, the neglect, the truth. He knelt, his shadow falling over the crib. The children flinched, pressing closer together. He could have ended it quickly, but that wasn't the point. That wasn't the message. "It's okay," Ray murmured, his voice surprisingly soft, almost a whisper, a chilling contrast to the violence he'd just committed. He reached out a hand, not to touch, but to point vaguely around the room, at the colorful mobile, the stuffed animals, the tiny shoes lined up neatly. All this perfect little world, it's not going to be so perfect anymore, is it? His eyes, cold and devoid of empathy, fixed on their terrified faces. "You see," he continued, his voice still low, almost conversational, "they tell you it lasts forever. All the pretty things, all the happy times. But it doesn't. It never does. Not really." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone that was more menacing than any shout. "You'll remember this. You'll remember what happens when things aren't so idealistic." He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "You'll see the truth now, just like I did." He stood up, leaving the children huddled in their crib, their small, terrified eyes fixed on him. He moved silently through the house, his gaze sweeping over the family photos, the small, cherished items that spoke of a life he despised. He found Helen Miller's silver thimble nestled in a sewing basket and Arthur Miller's lucky fishing hat pin stuck to a corkboard in the den. He carefully pocketed them. These weren't just objects, they were pieces of their perfect, fragile world. And he was taking them. Leaving the children alive was part of the message. They would carry the memory, the trauma, the shattered idealism. They would live with the echoes of silence, just as he had. And that, in his twisted mind, was the ultimate trophy. The shadow of Ray Jenkins, a criminal profile. Detective Imogen Ginny O'Malley, with Finn resting steadfastly at her side, stood before a whiteboard in her office. It wasn't covered with a typical cold case timeline, but a chilling tapestry of interconnected atrocities. She had meticulously pieced together the fragments of Ray Jenkins's life and crimes, culminating in a detailed criminal profile of a man who had, for decades, operated under the radar as a seemingly unassuming utility lineman. Demographics and lifestyle, the invisible predator. Raymond M. Jenkins was, on the surface, an ordinary working-class man. Born in Arkansas, his life was marked by transience, a key factor in his ability to evade detection. His profession as a lineman provided him with a legitimate reason to travel extensively across multiple southern states: Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. This mobility allowed him to enter new communities, commit his heinous acts, and then vanish, leaving behind baffled law enforcement and shattered families. He drove a distinctive blue van, often described as beat up but meticulously maintained, serving as both his mobile workshop and, chillingly, his silent witness. Despite his violent secret life, his daughters described him as a good dad, albeit a distant one, highlighting the facade of normalcy he maintained within his family. Modus operandi, the destroyer of ideals. Ray Jenkins's pattern of operation was chillingly consistent, evolving slightly over the years but retaining its core elements. Target selection: his primary targets were picture-perfect or seemingly stable, loving family units consisting of a mother, a father, and children. This was a direct manifestation of his deep-seated psychological trauma. In method of entry, while the exact means of entry varied, there was often no forced entry, suggesting either opportunistic entry through unlocked doors or windows, or gaining trust under a pretext. Its victims, the parents were always murdered, typically through blunt force trauma or gunshots, indicating a high degree of rage and a desire for absolute control. And children, in nearly every case, the children were left unharmed, often found hidden or asleep. This isn't a sign of mercy, but rather a deliberate act to ensure they survive to grapple with the profound trauma of their parents' murders, serving as a perverse extension of his psychological dominance over the family unit. Lack of monetary motive. Critically, in none of the identified cases were valuables such as cash, jewelry, or electronics stolen. This consistently baffled original investigators, who assumed robbery as the primary motive. And trophy taking. Jenkins consistently stole sentimental personal items from the victims or their homes. These weren't for monetary gain, but served as trophies, physical reminders of his power and control over the lives he destroyed. The specific items underscore their symbolic significance to him. Psychological profile: rage born of neglect. Ginny's deep dive into Ray Jenkins's childhood and young adulthood provided crucial insight into his pathology. A traumatic childhood: Jenkins endured a profoundly neglectful and traumatic childhood characterized by absentee alcoholic parents, frequent instability, and a lack of secure attachments. This likely fostered deep-seated rage and a profound sense of abandonment. Untargeted rage: his attacks on picture-perfect families were an act of displaced rage against the idealized family unit he was denied. By destroying these families, he was, in a twisted way, asserting control over the very stability he craved but could not achieve. Need for control: the meticulous planning, the deliberate leaving of children, and the systematic collection of trophies point to a powerful need for control and a desire to relive the psychological triumph of his acts. An escalation: the Hot Springs case, with its 4 victims, suggests an escalation of violence over time, possibly indicating a deepening of his pathology or a growing confidence in his ability to evade capture. The disorganized killer traits: while methodical in his targeting and trophy taking, the lack of sophisticated forensic countermeasures and his transient, less structured life align with aspects of a disorganized serial killer, driven by internal compulsion rather than elaborate planning. The identified victim timeline: a trail of tears across the South. Ginny had now firmly linked Ray Jenkins to multiple previously unsolved, double and even quadruple homicides. Jonesboro AR, Thompson family, in Meridian MS, Patterson family, Hattiesburg MS, Evans family, Bayou Bella, Dubois family, in Little Rock AR, McGowan family, Hot Springs AR, Thompson Clark murders, Austin TX, Rodriguez family, and Odessa TX, Carson family. The rank confirmed cases accounted for 16 victims and represented 16 of the 27 items in the trophy box. Ginny knew that 11 other pieces of personal history awaited identification, hinting at a far greater toll of lives taken by Ray Jenkins across the southern states during his decades as an unassuming lineman. The cold cases were turning hot, and a monster from the past was finally being unmasked. The whiteboard in Ginny's office was now a chilling monument to Ray Jenkins's hidden reign of terror. Each pen represented a shattered family, each line a life tragically cut short. With 16 items from the trophy box accounted for, Ginny knew there were still 11 more stories of loss waiting to be uncovered. The geographical patterns were clear. Ray moved, Ray killed. Ray took his perverse souvenirs. Her hypervigilance, usually directed outwards, was now also focused internally, monitoring her own mental state. The sheer volume of human suffering she was unearthing was immense, but Finn's calming presence and the righteous anger she felt on behalf of the victims kept her grounded. Little Rock, Arkansas, the Miller family. Ginny revisited Ray's work records for any periods where he might have been in the Little Rock area, particularly those times before the MC Gowan murders in 1975. She found a stretch in the spring of 1974, a relatively minor contract for an installation project on the outskirts of the city. She contacted the Little Rock Police Department's cold case unit again, specifically asking about home invasions or double homicides from April to June 1974, with the now familiar modus operandi. Detective O'Connor, who had been intrigued by Ginny's initial inquiries into the MC Gowan case, had been quietly following her progress. "Detective O'Malley, I think you've just nailed another one." O'Connor's voice crackled over the phone, grim satisfaction in his tone. The Miller family. May 12, 1974. A young couple, Arthur and Helen Miller, found dead in their home in a developing subdivision. 2 children, toddlers aged 3 and 5, were discovered unharmed in their cribs in another room. The house was tossed, but the only things reported missing were Helen's silver bracelet, a family heirloom, and Arthur's initialed handkerchief. Ginny's stomach clenched. A silver bracelet and an initialed handkerchief, another intensely personal item. The cold, hard fact: that Ray Jenkins had struck in her own city a year before the MC Gowan case reinforced his pervasive and long-standing depravity. The trophy box now felt less like a collection of curiosities and more like a macabre catalog of souls. Ginny quickly sent the images of the bracelet and handkerchief from the box to LRPD. Within hours, surviving relatives of the Millers, now adults, confirmed the items. Another case, another family tragically linked to Ray Jenkins. Louisiana, the Beauvais family. Next, Ginny moved forward in Ray's timeline to a period after the Austin and Carson murders, but before his eventual disappearance from the records. She focused on his movements in Louisiana in late 1978, searching for any significant contracts or prolonged stays after the Bayou Bell case in 1973. She found he'd taken a substantial maintenance contract in Lafayette, Louisiana for several months, beginning in September 1978. She reconnected with Detective Mark Boudreau of the Louisiana State Police, sharing the new information and Ray's specific location during that time. Boudreau was already convinced of Ginny's findings and was eager to assist. Lafayette, late 78, Boudreau mused, checking his digital database. We had one, the Beauvais family. November 3rd, 1978. Charles and Nicole Beauvais, found deceased in their home. Their preteen son, 11 years old, was found hiding in the attic, traumatized but physically unharmed. Robbery was ruled out. Nothing valuable was taken. The missing items were a set of old, intricately carved wooden rosary beads belonging to Nicole and Charles's unique brass compass, which had been passed down through generations. A wooden rosary, echoing the one taken from the Rodriguez family in Austin. A brass compass, an item of deep personal and familial significance. The pattern remained terrifyingly consistent even after nearly a decade of his spree. Detective Boudreau, Ginny said, her voice now filled with a grim determination. I have those rosary beads and that brass compass. They are with the personal effects of Raymond M. Jenkins. The confirmation from Lafayette quickly followed. The identification by the Beauvais' now adult son was definitive. The map of Ray Jenkins' terror now looked even more complete. In Jonesboro, A.R., Thompson family, Meridian, M.S., Patterson family, Hattiesburg, M.S., Evans family, and Bayou Bella, Dubois family, Little Rock, A.R., Miller family, Little Rock, A.R., McGowan family, Hot Springs, A.R., Thompson Clark murders, Austin T.X. Rodriguez family, and Odessa T.X. Carson family, Lafayette La Beauvais family. With these additions, Ginny had now linked Ray Jenkins to 10 confirmed cases, representing 20 victims. The trophy box still held 7 more unidentified items. Each one represented another cold case, another family, another chapter in the horrific story of Ray Jenkins, the unassuming lineman who brought death to the picture-perfect homes he so despised. The sheer scope of his decades-long hidden crimes was becoming terrifyingly clear, and Ginny wouldn't rest until every single item in that box had a name and a story. The weight of her findings, now encompassing 10 confirmed cases and 20 victims spread across 4 states and nearly a decade, made it clear this was no longer just a series of isolated cold cases. This was a multi-state, decades-long serial killer investigation, far too vast for a single municipal detective and her border collie, no matter how brilliant. It was time to call in the cavalry. Ginny meticulously compiled all her evidence. Ray Jenkins' comprehensive work history, his detailed criminal profile, the complete list of confirmed victims, and, crucially, high-resolution photographs of every single item in the trophy box. They identified 16 and the remaining 11 silent pieces. She crafted a formal report, concise yet compelling, laying out the chilling pattern she had uncovered. Her contact at the FBI was Special Agent Thomas McAllister, a grizzled but sharp-witted veteran from the Behavioral Analysis Unit at Quantico, whom she had met at a national cold case conference. Ginny sent him her report, followed by a phone call. Mac, she began, her voice devoid of its usual casual banter, I've got something here that's going to change a lot of cold case files across the South. It's bigger than anything I've ever seen. She walked him through the highlights: Ray Jenkins, the unassuming lineman, his traumatic childhood, the picture perfect family target, the ritualistic murder of parents, the sparing of children, and finally, the trophy box of sentimental items, 27 pieces of evidence, each representing a unique victim or set of victims. She described the chilling consistency from Jonesboro in 1970 to Lafayette in 1978, and the 4 victims in Hot Springs. Mac Allister listened in stunned silence. He was used to complex cases, but the sheer span of time and geography, coupled with the unique modus operandi and the physical evidence of the trophy box, was unprecedented. Ginny, he finally said, his voice slow and heavy with the implications, this is staggering. This isn't just a cold case solved. This is potentially one of the most prolific, undetected serial killers in modern American history. Within 48 hours, a specialized FBI team was on its way to Little Rock. Mac Allister arrived first, accompanied by a seasoned forensic anthropologist and a data analyst specializing in historical criminal databases. They set up a temporary command center in a larger conference room at the LRPD, transforming Ginny's whiteboard into a sprawling, multi-color-coded monument to Ray Jenkins's horrifying legacy. Ginny laid out the physical trophy box for Mac Allister. He donned gloves, carefully examining each identified item, then moved to the remaining 11. These will be our focus, he stated, his voice grim. These are the keys to the last victims. The collaboration began immediately. The FBI's resources were unparalleled. On data analysis, the data analyst began inputting all of Ray Jenkins's meticulously detailed work logs into a sophisticated geographical and temporal mapping system. This would allow them to pinpoint his exact whereabouts and durations of stay in every town across his multi-state career, creating precise windows for potential criminal activity. NCIC and VICAP cross-referencing. The FBI team initiated a comprehensive cross-referencing effort through the National Crime Information Center and the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program databases. They would search for similar unsolved homicides, particularly those involving families, specific weapon types, and the absence of clear monetary motive, focusing on the refined timelines and locations provided by Ginny. In forensic review, the forensic anthropologist carefully re-examined the items from the trophy box, looking for any microscopic evidence, trace DNA, or unique characteristics that might provide further clues about the victims or their environment. The bone button, for instance, might have microscopic residues that hint at its original purpose. In victim outreach coordination, the FBI also took on the daunting task of coordinating with the surviving family members of the identified victims, offering support and explaining the massive unfolding investigation. Ginny, with Finn always nearby, became the central pivot point for the entire operation. Her intimate knowledge of Ray Jenkins's profile, her understanding of the specific details that original investigators had missed, and her intuitive leaps were invaluable. She worked side by side with Mac Allister, guiding the new analytical efforts, poring over digital maps that now glowed with Ray's movements, and strategizing how to approach other cold case units. We're looking for patterns within the missing patterns, Mac Allister observed one evening, staring at the map. Jenkins was a creature of habit. His chosen victims, his trophies, we just need to find the right entry points in these other states. The investigation now had the full force of the federal government behind it. The silent whispers from the trophy box were about to become shouts, bringing an unimaginable reckoning for the monster who had terrorized the South for decades. The Little Rock Police Department's conference room, now repurposed as the FBI's temporary command center, buzzed with a controlled intensity. The whiteboard, expanded with additional panels, showcased a horrifying spiderweb of dates, locations, and victim names. Finn, ever the discerning observer, seemed to have instinctively adopted a new routine, patrolling the perimeter of the room, occasionally resting his chin on a knee, taking in the focused, grim faces of the agents. Special Agent Mac Allister, true to his reputation, moved with a quiet efficiency, his gravelly voice cutting through the hum of computers and hushed conversations. He orchestrated the vast data-gathering operation, leveraging the FBI's unparalleled access to historical crime databases. "Okay, Ginny," McAllister said one afternoon, gesturing to a projection of Ray Jenkins's meticulously plotted itinerary. "Our geotemporal analysis highlights a couple of significant clusters for the remaining 11 items. We're seeing extended stays in northern Florida in late 78, early 79, and a curious period in the panhandle of Florida in early 80. Then a string of shorter but frequent contracts in Georgia through 81 and 82. Ginny felt a surge of adrenaline. Florida and Georgia. New states, new victim pools. The trophy box was still speaking. Gainesville, Florida, the Henderson family. Their first major hit came from Gainesville, Florida. Ray's work record showed him involved in a major electrical infrastructure upgrade for several months, coinciding with a chillingly similar cold case. The Henderson family, reported Agent Miller, the FBI's data analyst, her finger on a screen projection. December 15, 1978, Thomas and Karen Henderson found deceased in their suburban home. Their 2 children, 9 and 12, were found unharmed, hidden in a crawl space under the house. No valuables taken, but Karen's unique antique silver thimble and Thomas's prized fishing reel were missing. Ginny felt a familiar prickle. Another silver thimble, again a sentimental piece, and a fishing reel echoing the lure from Hot Springs. The pattern was as undeniable as it was horrifying. A quick scan of her evidence photos confirmed it. The thimble and a specific old-fashioned fishing reel sat among the remaining items in the trophy box. 2 more items accounted for. Pensacola, Florida, the Davies family. Next, they moved to a period Ray spent in the Florida Panhandle. Pensacola, Florida yielded another grim match. The Davies family, Miller announced, scrolling through records. February 22, 1980, Robert and Elizabeth Davies, both discovered in their home. Their 3 children, all teenagers, were found barricaded in an upstairs bathroom, terrified but physically unharmed. The original report notes the absence of Elizabeth's delicate porcelain doll collection and Robert's father's military service medals. Porcelain dolls, a military medal. Deeply personal, deeply symbolic. Ginny located the faded photo of a small, intricately painted porcelain doll and a set of old, tarnished military medals in the trophy box. 4 more items were now accounted for. Atlanta, Georgia, the Sterling family. The trail then led them to Atlanta, Georgia. Ray Jenkins's record showed him with multiple shorter contracts around the metropolitan area through 1981 and 1982. The sheer size of Atlanta made the search harder, but the specificity of Ray's MO proved invaluable. The Sterling family came the call from a Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Detective coordinating with the FBI. August 10, 1981. Mark and Carol Sterling, both murdered in their home. Their infant, just 6 months old, was found sleeping peacefully in her crib. Nothing stolen of value. But Carol's grandmother's antique silver hairbrush and Mark's prized coin collection, a small specific set of mercury dimes, were noted as missing. An antique silver hairbrush, a specific coin collection. Ginny's gaze went to the trophy box, then back to the photos of the remaining items. Yes, a silver hairbrush, clearly antique, and a small worn velvet pouch, its contents clinking faintly, mercury dimes. 2 more items were identified. With these latest breakthroughs, the map of Ray Jenkins's crimes expanded further. In Jonesboro, AR, Thompson family, Meridian, MS, Patterson family, Hattiesburg, MS, Evans family, and Bayou Bella, Dubois family, Little Rock AR, Miller family, Little Rock AR, McGowan family, Hot Springs AR, Thompson Clark murders, in Austin TX, Rodriguez family, and Odessa TX, Carson family, Yansville FL, Henderson family, Pensacola FL, Davies family, Atlanta GA, Sterling family, Lafayette Law, Beauvais family. The list now encompassed 13 confirmed cases and a staggering 26 victims. 24 items from the trophy box were linked, leaving only 3 unidentified. The collaboration with the FBI had accelerated the process exponentially. The relentless pursuit of Ray Jenkins' shadow was nearing its end, but the gravity of what they had uncovered weighed heavily on every agent in the room. Each identified item was a triumph of justice, but also a stark reminder of the deep, enduring pain left in the monster's wake. Ginny now has only 3 items left. What next? Perhaps the search for the last few, or the emotional weight of confronting the collective horror of the identified cases. The atmosphere in the LRPD command center, though still grim, was now tinged with a palpable sense of nearing completion. 24 of the 27 items from Ray Jenkins's macabre trophy box had been linked to confirmed cold cases across 5 states, representing 26 victims. Only 3 items remained silent, holding the final secrets of his horrifying spree. Ginny and Agent Mac Allister narrowed their focus on Ray's later work history, the years following the Atlanta case in 1981, leading up to his eventual retirement and death in 2002. His work became more sporadic in the late 80s and 90s, often shorter contracts, but he remained within the general southern region. The last 3, Mississippi Revisited and Alabama. Their breakthrough came from a concentrated analysis of his movements in 1983 and 1985, 2 periods where he spent extended time in areas not yet linked to his crimes. The first lead came from a remote, heavily wooded area of Mississippi, where Ray had taken a lengthy contract in the summer of 1983 for a new transmission line. The nearest town was Laurel, Mississippi. A search of cold cases in Jones County, MS, from that period using Ray's specific MO yielded a tragic match. The Barnes family reported Detective Sarah Bound from MBI, confirming the details to Mac Allister and Ginny. September 14, 1983, Frank and Dorothy Barnes found murdered in their secluded home outside Laurel. Their teenage son, just turned 16, came home from school to find them. No valuables taken, but Dorothy's antique silver locket, another one, this one with a unique filigree design, and Frank's service dog tag from the Vietnam War were missing. Ginny felt a chilling pang. Another silver locket, another set of military dog tags. Ray's targets and his trophies remained hauntingly consistent. She located the specific locket and the dog tag in the box. 2 more items identified 2 more victims, the Barnes family. Next, their data mapping highlighted an extended contract for Ray in Alabama, specifically around Montgomery, in early 1985. Ginny contacted the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency Cold Case Unit. We have a very old, very frustrating case from that time, and a Leah detective informed them. The Collins family, March 2nd, 1985. David and Patricia Collins found murdered in their home in a quiet Montgomery neighborhood. Their young daughter, only 4, was found unharmed in her bedroom, a miracle. But the house was cleaned out of personal items. Patricia's grandmother's porcelain thimble, not valuable but precious, and David's engraved pocket watch, a family heirloom, were never found. Ginny felt a profound sense of grim finality, a porcelain thimble echoing the one taken from the Davies family, and an engraved pocket watch, similar in sentimental value to the one taken from Patrick M.C. Gowan. She pulled out the remaining item from the trophy box, a small, elegant porcelain thimble, and then the final, last item, a tarnished, engraved pocket watch. "We have them," Ginny said, her voice quiet but firm, confirming the ultimate connection. The porcelain thimble and the engraved pocket watch belonged to the Collins family. The final identification brought a heavy silence to the command center. 27 items, 27 stories, 30 victims. The full, horrifying scope of Raymond M. Jenkins's criminal career was now laid bare, and Jonesboro A.R., Thompson family, Meridian M.S., Patterson family, Hattiesburg M.S., Evans family, and Bayou Bella, Dubois family, Little Rock A.R., Miller family, Little Rock A.R., McGowan family, Hot Springs A.R., Thompson Clark murders, Austin T.X. Rodriguez family, and Odessa T.X. Carson family, Lafayette La Beauvais family, Hinsville F.L. Henderson family, Pensacola F.L. Davies family, Atlanta G.A., Sterling family, and Laurel M.S., Barnes family, and Montgomery Al Collins family. 15 confirmed cases, 30 victims. Every single item in the trophy box accounted for. The pattern of Ray's neglected and traumatic childhood leading him to unleash his rage on what he perceived as perfect families, stealing pieces of their happiness and stability as his perverse trophies, was now unequivocally proven. McAllister looked at Ginny, a rare look of profound respect in his eyes. "Detective O'Malley," he said, "you've just closed one of the most extensive serial killer cases in American history. Without that intuition, without your hypervigilance, and without Finn, this monster would have remained hidden in plain sight." Ginny nodded, a wave of exhaustion washing over her, mixed with a deep, quiet satisfaction. Justice, however delayed, had finally arrived for 30 souls, and closure, however painful, awaited their families. Finn nudged her hand, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, a silent acknowledgement of the monumental task they had finally completed. The cold case, once thought unsolvable, was now a chilling testament to the unseen shadows that linger in plain sight. The resolution of the Ray Jenkins case, while a monumental triumph for law enforcement, marked the beginning of another, equally vital phase for Ginny O'Malley, bringing agonizingly delayed closure to the surviving families. This was where her deep empathy, coupled with Finn's unique ability to offer comfort, would truly shine. The FBI handled the formal notifications and the immense paperwork, but Ginny insisted on delivering the news personally to the extent possible, traveling to each state, often with local cold case detectives by her side. The journey was emotionally taxing, a pilgrimage through decades of grief. In Jonesboro, she met the Thompson brothers, now grizzled men who still carried the burden of guilt for surviving their parents. In Pensacola, she sat with the Davies siblings who had barricaded themselves in the bathroom, their childhood terror still palpable. In Montgomery, the Collins daughter, now mother herself, openly wept as Ginny gently explained how her parents' precious thimble and watch had led to the truth. In each home, Ginny didn't just deliver facts, she offered understanding. She explained Ray Jenkins's twisted pathology, not to excuse but to provide context for the senseless violence. She spoke of his own traumatic childhood, helping them understand that their loved ones were not victims of random chance, but targets of a specific, albeit horrifying, pattern. Crucially, Finn was always present. His calm, comforting demeanor was an immediate balm. In one particularly raw meeting, a victim's adult child, overwhelmed by emotion, sank to the floor. Finn, without prompting, gently nudged his head against the person's hand, then lay down beside them, offering silent, unwavering support. His presence often seemed to break through the initial shock and despair, allowing a space for grief to flow and eventually for questions to be asked and answered. Ginny also facilitated the presence of other therapy dogs through local organizations, recognizing Finn's unique capacity and seeking to extend that comfort to more families simultaneously. The sight of these gentle, empathetic animals offering non-judgmental solace proved invaluable in meetings that would otherwise have been almost unbearable. Ginny noticed a recurring theme, the isolation of their grief. For decades, these families had carried the weight of an unsolved mystery, often feeling forgotten, their pain unacknowledged. The closure, while bringing answers, also brought a fresh wave of processing. Inspired by this shared burden, Ginny began to envision something more. Working with the FBI and the various state cold case units, she proposed and then meticulously helped to orchestrate a groundbreaking initiative, a private virtual network for the victims' families of Raymond M. Jenkins. The first online meeting was tentative, filled with nervous silences and hesitant introductions, but as Sarah M.C. Gowan and Jack M.C. Gowan spoke, then the Dubois twins, then the Thompson brothers, and on, a powerful connection formed. They were no longer isolated islands of grief. They were a community, bound by the unspeakable horror of Ray Jenkins, but now also by a shared journey towards healing. For so long, I felt like we were the only ones. A woman from Florida shared, her voice trembling over the video call. To know there were others, that he did this to so many more. It's awful, yes, but it also means we're not alone in this pain. It feels like a burden has been lifted. Ginny facilitated discussions, sometimes offering insights into the psychology of their shared trauma, other times simply listening. She saw catharsis in their shared stories, in the mutual understanding that transcended geography and time. They shared memories of their loved ones, exchanged details of the original crimes, and collectively bore witness to the enormity of what Ray Jenkins had done. This network, born from Ginny's empathy and intuition, became a crucial part of the healing process for these families. It was a testament to the fact that while justice might take decades, the human spirit, with support and shared experience, could begin to find its way towards peace. For Ginny, witnessing these connections, seeing the raw pain slowly begin to transform into shared strength, was as profoundly rewarding as solving the cases themselves. It reinforced her belief that her role as a detective extended far beyond the crime scene, reaching into the very heart of human resilience. With the last of the trophy box items identified and the victim families connected, the immediate frantic pace of the Ray Jenkins investigation began to settle. The FBI was now deep into compiling comprehensive reports for all 15 cases, coordinating with state authorities for formal closures, and ensuring the long-awaited answers reached every affected family. For Ginny, however, the professional closure wasn't quite enough. She still felt a pull, a need to understand the complete psychological arc of Raymond M. Jenkins. What happened to a man like that when he stopped killing? Did the rage subside, or did it merely transform? She returned to the last decade or so of Ray's life, from the final confirmed murder in Montgomery in 1985 until his death in California in 2002. His work logs from this period showed fewer extended contracts, more short-term, local odd jobs, and eventually a move to California to be closer to his daughters. Ginny accessed what public records she could find: old property tax records, utility bills, and even limited medical records if they were publicly available due to his death. She spoke again with Teresa and Phyllis, gently probing for more details about their father's later years, specifically after 1985. They were hesitant at first, still grappling with the monstrous truth, but Ginny's consistent empathy eventually opened them up. He seemed calmer, Teresa recalled, frowning slightly as she searched for the right words. Less restless, maybe. He wasn't on the road as much. He spent more time in his shed, tinkering with things. He built us some shelves, fixed a leaky faucet, small stuff. Phyllis added, yeah, he got into gardening for a while. Not like big gardens, but he grew tomatoes, herbs, and he kept that blue van until it practically fell apart. But he used it for hauling gardening supplies, not for long trips anymore. Ginny noted the details: less transience, a focus on domestic, mundane tasks. Her psychological training offered a few hypotheses. And burnout, decline, serial killers, like anyone else, can experience physical and psychological decline. Perhaps the intense emotional and logistical demands of his crimes became too much as he aged. His rage might not have disappeared, but his capacity to act on it in the same brutal way could have diminished. And shift in control mechanism, the need for control, so central to his pathology, might have shifted from inflicting violence to controlling his immediate environment. The meticulous maintenance of his van, the gardening, the tinkering in his shed, these could be manifestations of that same need, but redirected into harmless domestic activities. Fear of detection as technology advanced and law enforcement became more sophisticated. Jenkins, an astute observer, might have sensed the growing risk. His increasing caution, noted by his brother Frank earlier, might have led him to cease active killing. Insufficiency of trophies. It's possible that with the vast collection in his hidden box, his psychological need for trophies was, for a time, sated. The sheer volume of his conquests might have provided enough internal gratification. There were no reports of violence in his later years, no further disappearances or suspicious deaths linked to his locations. Ray Jenkins lived out his final years as a seemingly innocuous, quiet, if somewhat solitary old man. He never mentioned the box? Ginny asked Teresa one last time, gently. Teresa shook her head, her eyes sad. Never. We didn't even know about it until after he was gone. It was like a whole other person hiding in plain sight. Ginny felt a chilling resonance with Teresa's words, Hiding in plain sight, that's exactly what Ray Jenkins had been. His later years offered a glimpse into a twisted sort of retirement for a monster where the outward behaviors changed, but the underlying psychological drives likely remained, merely rechanneled or subdued by age and circumstance. As Ginny finalized her psychological summary of Ray Jenkins, she realized it was a vital component not just for this case, but for understanding the long-term patterns of such predators. The monster had been identified, his victims named, and his psychological blueprint laid bare. The pursuit of justice had led her not just to the cold, hard facts of murder, but into the dark, complex depths of a shattered human psyche, proving that some horrors could truly linger unseen for decades until a red-headed detective and her intuitive border collie came along to shine a light. The success of the Ray Jenkins case and the groundbreaking methods Ginny employed didn't just happen in a vacuum. Her presence in the cold case unit, a relatively young detective specializing in such an intricate, challenging field, was itself the result of a deliberate, insightful decision made years prior by a seasoned veteran of the Little Rock Police Department. That man was Detective Sergeant Arthur Art Jenkins, a gruff but perceptive detective with 4 decades on the force. Art had seen it all, and in his later years he had developed a keen eye for talent that existed outside the typical mold. He was nearing retirement, and he saw in Ginny O'Malley not just potential, but a unique, almost indispensable set of qualities for the very unit he hoped to see flourish. Art had first encountered Ginny not in a police academy classroom, but in a very different context, a local seminar on canine behavior and advanced service dog training. At the time, Ginny was a young officer, still in patrol, but dedicating her off-duty hours to volunteer work, training service dogs for individuals with various needs. Art, whose own sister had an assistance dog, had attended the seminar out of personal interest and had been struck by Ginny's quiet competence and her almost preternatural understanding of animal behavior. She spoke not just of commands, but of subtle cues, emotional resonance, and the profound bond between human and animal. It was here that he first met Finn, still a pup in training, already displaying an uncanny perceptiveness. Art, having a nose for people as well as crime, noticed more than just her dog handling skills. He saw a certain hypervigilance in Ginny, a way her eyes constantly scanned a room, a subtle tension in her shoulders even when relaxed. He sensed a depth to her empathy that went beyond typical compassion. Through casual conversations and discreet inquiries, Art learned about Ginny's challenging past. He discovered that Ginny's childhood had been marked by years of severe bullying. This wasn't just typical schoolyard teasing, it was sustained, insidious psychological torment that left deep, enduring scars. This prolonged trauma, Art surmised, had resulted in Ginny developing complex PTSD. While it presented daily challenges, Art also recognized that it had inadvertently forged within her a unique set of skills. A heightened awareness of body language. Surviving prolonged bullying often forces individuals to become exceptionally attuned to subtle social cues, facial expressions, and body language, both of aggressors and potential allies. Ginny's very survival had depended on reading people, a skill now amplified by her PTSD-induced hypervigilance. She instinctively noticed the flicker in a suspect's eye, the subtle stiffening of a jaw, the minute tension in a shoulder, details most people missed. Exceptional intuition rooted in observation, her mind constantly processing environmental data, made rapid subconscious connections that others couldn't. What appeared to be gut instinct was, in fact, an accelerated analysis of thousands of tiny, often imperceptible details. This was the keen intuition Art recognized. With profound empathy for trauma, her own experiences with trauma gave her a visceral understanding of victims' long-term pain and the psychological intricacies of suffering. This empathy allowed her to connect with grieving families on a deeper level, to ask questions with a sensitivity that elicited crucial buried memories, background in psychology and mental illness. Art also knew of her academic background. After her experiences, Ginny had pursued extensive studies in psychology, particularly in trauma and behavioral patterns. This formal knowledge merged seamlessly with her lived experience, giving her a unique lens through which to view both victims and perpetrators. The unbreakable bond with Finn, Art saw how Finn wasn't just a service dog, he was an extension of Ginny's own heightened senses, a literal anchor against the anxieties of her PTSD. He picked up on emotional shifts, providing feedback that silently confirmed Ginny's own reads or alerted her to nuances she might have been too close to perceive. Their symbiotic relationship was a powerful investigative tool. When the time came to open a new position in the cold case unit, Art Jenkins personally championed Ginny's selection. He fought through the traditional skepticism about hiring someone with a complex medical history like PTSD, arguing vehemently that her affliction was paradoxically her greatest asset. He knew that for cases that had gone cold for decades, relying on fresh eyes, unconventional thinking, and an almost supernatural ability to read human behavior and connect disparate dots was far more valuable than standard procedure alone. Doesn't just look at the evidence, Chief. Art had argued to his superiors she feels the patterns. And with that dog, she's got a partner who can confirm the whispers her gut hears. She's built for this. She'll solve cases no one else can touch. And Art Jenkins, as the unfolding horror of Ray Jenkins's legacy proved, had been absolutely right. Ginny's selection wasn't just a hiring, it was an act of prescience that finally brought justice to 30 souls. This backstory provides a strong foundation for Ginny's unique abilities and her role in the story. It explains why she is where she is, and how her past, though painful, became a powerful tool for good. The conference room still hummed with the quiet industry of the FBI task force, but Ginny felt a pull to refine her understanding of Ray Jenkins's methodology. They had mapped his movements and identified his victims, but the question of how he selected his targets, the specific trigger that initiated his murderous rage, still gnawed at her. It wasn't enough to know he targeted perfect families. She needed to understand the window of observation, the precise moments when he identified his prey. She turned to the records of Ray's specific work projects, particularly the longer-term ones that had placed him in a community for weeks or months. Her goal was to interview retired linemen or supervisors who had worked on similar projects during the 70s and 80s, to paint a picture of a typical workday and the opportunities it would afford for reconnaissance. Ginny arranged calls with several former linemen who had worked on major infrastructure projects across the South, men who remembered the gruff solitude of the profession. She spoke with a retired crew chief named Earl MC Entire, who had overseen several large-scale installations in rural Arkansas and Mississippi. A lineman's schedule on a big project like that was pretty standard, mostly, MC Entire explained, his voice raspy from years of shouted commands and open air. Sunrise to sundown, sometimes longer if there was a bad storm or a tight deadline. We'd be out there rain or shine, stringing new lines, setting poles, upgrading substations. Dirty, dangerous work. Ginny pressed him on the details. When you're working on a new line installation through a neighborhood, what's the routine? Well, you gotta know the terrain, Matt continued. Before you even string a wire, you're out there, walking the line, mapping out pole placement, identifying easements. You're looking at property lines, where the houses sit in relation to the poles, how far the trees are. It's all about access and obstacles. You spend a lot of time just looking. This was crucial. So you'd be looking at people's backyards, their houses, Ginny clarified. Oh yeah, all the time, Matt confirmed. You'd see everything. Kids playing in the yard, families eating dinner through the kitchen window, folks out gardening. You're right there, often with nobody even noticing you. Just another guy in a hard hat blending in with the scenery. And if you needed a break or to run a wire just so, you might park your van down a side street out of the main way. Ginny's hypervigilance immediately connected these details to Ray Jenkins. His long contracts meant he wasn't just passing through, he was embedded. He would have spent days, even weeks, in close proximity to the homes, mapping out his work. This allowed for extensive, unhurried observation, routine observation. He could meticulously observe family routines. When parents left for work, when children went to school, dinner times, bedtime rituals, social gatherings, He'd see the picture-perfect moments through windows, the laughter in backyards, the very domestic bliss that fueled his rage when vulnerability assessment, his detailed mapping of utility lines, would give him intimate knowledge of a neighborhood's layout, including potential blind spots, escape routes, and easy access points to properties, all under the guise of legitimate work. Anonymity, dressed in work clothes, driving a utility-style van. He was virtually invisible. Neighbors would simply see the lineman, not a lurking predator. He blended into the background, a silent, observing specter. What about when the work was done for the day? Ginny asked. Would linemen often stay in the area or commute? Depends on the job length and how far from home, Mac replied. If it was a long haul, we'd get a motel or sometimes a long-term rental in town. But even then, after hours, you might grab a bite or just drive around. No one's really watching where you go once the workday's done, long as you show up in the morning. This confirmed Ginny's theory of Ray's post-work observations. He wasn't just selecting targets during daylight hours. His evenings, spent living temporarily in the victim communities, provided ample time for continued surveillance, for staking out the families who had triggered his rage. The pieces clicked into place. Ray Jenkins's profession wasn't just a cover for his mobility. It was his ultimate tool for target selection and reconnaissance. It granted him unparalleled access and anonymity, allowing him to immerse himself in the lives of his victims, to watch their perceived happiness, and to plan their destruction with chilling precision. His very job was the perfect camouflage for his pathology, a silent observer in plain sight, choosing his perfect families to systematically dismantle. The whispers, though never overtly spoken in her presence, were always there. Ginny O'Malley knew them well. She saw it in the sidelong. Glances from some of the more old-school detectives. Heard it in the carefully neutral tone of dispatchers when her name came up for a sensitive task. Her complex PTSD wasn't a secret. It was part of her file, a medical history that included several periods of psychological hospitalization over the years. These were acute phases triggered by overwhelming stress or particularly brutal cases where her hypervigilance spiraled into debilitating anxiety, requiring intensive therapeutic intervention to regain equilibrium. For many, this history would have been a career death sentence in law enforcement, a glaring red flag waving unstable, but Detective Sergeant Art Jenkins had seen past the perceived fragility. He understood that the very intensity of Ginny's internal landscape, the profound way her brain processed information and threat, was precisely what made her uniquely suited for the cold cases that defied conventional logic. You want to catch a fox? You gotta think like a fox. Art used to grunt, a favorite saying of his. But when you're after a phantom fox, the kind that leaves no tracks, you need someone who sees the wind. Ray Jenkins was a phantom fox. His criminality wasn't crude or impulsive. It was insidious, deliberate, and deeply personalized. He operated outside the typical criminal playbook, leaving behind a trail of psychological destruction rather than material gain. Traditional policing, focused on forensic evidence and clear motives, had simply run out of road. This is where Ginny's unique, somewhat untrainable abilities became indispensable. Her complex PTSD had wired her brain for survival, forcing her to develop a micro-observation at the macro level. While hypervigilance could be overwhelming, Ginny had learned to harness it. She didn't just see the details, she saw the absence of details, the anomalies, the tiny discrepancies in decades-old witness statements or crime scene photos that others dismissed as noise. This extended to the body language of the daughters, the nuances in old police reports, the feeling of a location frozen in time, and pattern recognition beyond logic. Her brain, trained by trauma to constantly seek patterns to predict danger, applied this same mechanism to criminal behavior. It was less about conscious deduction and more about an intuitive click when disparate pieces of information, a specific type of victim, a particular missing item, a transient lifestyle, aligned into a coherent, horrifying whole. This wasn't something learned in an academy. It was a deeply ingrained survival mechanism turned into an investigative superpower. The empathy of shared trauma, her own experiences with mental distress, and the long-term impact of trauma allowed her to connect with victims' families on a level no other detective could. She understood the weight of decades of unanswered questions, the subtle ways grief manifested, and the profound need for closure. This empathy wasn't a weakness, it was a key that unlocked conversations and memories others couldn't access. And as Finn as the externalized intuition, Finn was the perfect complement. He was her grounding wire, her early warning system, and her silent sounding board. He affirmed her intuitive reads of emotional states, providing a nonverbal confirmation that allowed Ginny to trust her gut even when the rational evidence wasn't immediately apparent. He was the tangible proof that her hypersensitivity could be a strength. In cases like Ray Jenkins, where the criminal also thought outside the box, operating on a motive beyond greed, maintaining a facade of normalcy, exploiting a transient lifestyle, conventional methods hit a wall. Jenkins was a master of psychological camouflage, blending into the background while leaving behind a trail of deeply personal yet baffling atrocities. Art Jenkins had seen that Ginny's disability was, in fact, her super ability. Her past, filled with pain and the isolating experience of psychological struggle, had inadvertently equipped her with the very tools needed to unravel the most cunning and psychologically complex criminals. She didn't just look for facts, she looked for the human story, the underlying emotional currents, the patterns of pathology. She understood the nuances of the human mind, both victim and perpetrator, in a way few others could. As the final reports on Ray Jenkins were prepared, and the network of victim families began its long journey towards collective healing, the LRPD and the FBI tacitly acknowledged the truth sometimes. To catch the criminals who defy conventional understanding, you need a detective who, by virtue of her own extraordinary and often painful experiences, understands the very fabric of human brokenness. Ginny O'Malley, the red-headed Irish detective with her border collie, had shown them that strength could indeed be forged in the crucible of vulnerability, and that true intuition could be the most powerful weapon against the shadows of the past. The grim work of identifying Ray Jenkins' victims brought a profound sense of justice, but for Ginny O'Malley, the closure for the dead was inextricably linked to the ongoing agonizing struggle of the living. She had personally met many of the surviving children, now adults, and the common threads of their trauma were heartbreakingly clear. Her own experiences with complex PTSD and her background in psychology gave her a visceral understanding of the long shadow cast by such an event. The psychological impact on the children who survived Ray Jenkins's attacks was devastating and lifelong, manifesting in common yet deeply personal ways. Around PTSD, this was almost universal. The fight, flight, or freeze response, triggered by the unspeakable horror of discovering their murdered parents, became etched into their developing brains. Symptoms like nightmares, flashbacks, hypervigilance, and an exaggerated startle response were common. Many described a constant sense of unease, a feeling that safety was an illusion. On survivors' guilt, a particularly insidious burden was the pervasive feeling of guilt for surviving when their parents did not. Children often irrationally blamed themselves. If only I hadn't been at camp, if only I hadn't hidden, if only I'd screamed. This guilt could cripple their ability to find joy or build stable lives, feeling unworthy of happiness, somewhat attachment issues. For children who lost their primary caregivers so violently, forming secure attachments in future relationships often became incredibly difficult. They might struggle with trust, fearing abandonment or betrayal, leading to either intense clinginess or emotional distance. Their worldview was fundamentally altered, believing that those they loved could be violently ripped away at any moment. An identity crisis. Their parents weren't just individuals, they were the architects of their children's identities. Losing them so brutally and mysteriously often left survivors with a profound sense of loss regarding who they were supposed to be or who they could have become. The lack of answers for decades compounded this, leaving a gaping void where their family history should have been, and developmental arrest for the youngest children, like the toddler from the Collins family, or the infant from the Evans family, who had no conscious memory of the event. The impact was still profound. They often grew up with unspoken anxieties, difficulties forming secure bonds, and a sense of something missing or something wrong that they couldn't articulate. Their trauma was pre-verbal, absorbed into their very being. The shadow of the unknown. For decades, the lack of answers added a torturous layer to their grief. The why haunted them, preventing true closure. Was it random? Were their parents targeted? Was the killer still out there? The identification of Ray Jenkins, while agonizing, finally provided a concrete why, allowing them to begin the long, arduous process of grief without the added burden of the unknown. Uncoping mechanisms. Many survivors developed complex coping mechanisms, some healthy and some less so. Ginny observed the universal sigh of relief that accompanied the revelation of Ray Jenkins's identity. It was a painful truth, but it was the truth. The monster finally had a name, a face, and a motive, however twisted. This allowed the survivors to reframe their trauma not as a meaningless act, but as the consequence of a specific, identifiable evil. The collective network Ginny established served as a crucial therapeutic space, allowing these now adult children to share their stories, validate each other's pain, and find strength in their shared journey. For Ginny, seeing the faces of these survivors connecting with their decades of unspoken pain reinforced the profound importance of cold case work. It wasn't just about solving a puzzle, it was about honoring the dead by healing the living, about shining a light into the darkest corners of human experience, guided by her own empathy and the quiet, comforting presence of Finn. The revelation of Raymond M. Jenkins as one of the most prolific, undetected serial killers in American history exploded across national and international media. The FBI, in close coordination with the Little Rock Police Department and all the implicated state agencies, held a joint press conference that sent shockwaves through the country. Ginny stood beside Special Agent Mac Allister, a quiet but commanding presence, her face conveying both the gravity of the findings and the relentless dedication that had led to them. Finn, as ever, was a few steps behind her, observing the throng of reporters with his characteristic calm. News channels ran special reports. Podcasts immediately spun up new series. True crime documentaries, already a popular genre, clamored for access to Ginny and the families. The story had every element of morbid fascination, a monster hiding in plain sight for decades, an unassuming lineman traveling through the heart of America, his victims' picture-perfect families, and the macabre trophy box unearthed by a lone, intuitive detective with her therapy dog. The initial reaction was a mixture of horror, disbelief, and a profound sense of relief from the affected communities. For decades, the unsolved murders had been local legends, whispered fears, or nagging frustrations for law enforcement. Now a name, a face, and a motive provided a brutal but vital answer. Families who had grown up in the shadow of these tragedies finally had an explanation. He could have been anyone's neighbor, one headline screamed. The banality of evil in a blue van, another piece pondered, echoing Hannah Arendt's famous phrase. The media dissected Ray Jenkins' psychological profile, his childhood trauma, and his horrifying modus operandi, trying to make sense of the senseless. They lauded Ginny O'Malley, painting her as a brilliant, unconventional detective, often highlighting her struggles with PTSD as both a challenge and a unique asset in her work. Finn became a minor celebrity, a symbol of comfort and intuition, closing the investigation. Behind the media frenzy, the actual work of formally closing the investigation was immense and painstaking. The FBI, with Ginny as a pivotal consultant, undertook several crucial steps. One, formal case closures. Each of the 15 cold cases across Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, and Florida was formally closed, attributing the homicides to Raymond M. Jenkins. This involved meticulous legal documentation, cross-referencing all evidence, and presenting the findings to each relevant district attorney's office. Though Jenkins was deceased, these formal closures provided legal finality for the victims' families, meant evidence cataloging and archiving. The trophy box and its contents became a central piece of a vast evidence archive. Every item was forensically processed again, meticulously cataloged, and securely stored. While DNA analysis was unlikely to yield results from decades-old handled items, future advancements in forensic science meant nothing was overlooked. The goal was to ensure future generations of investigators could learn from this unprecedented case. and family outreach and support. The network Ginny had initiated expanded dramatically with FBI resources. A dedicated victim support unit was established to offer ongoing counseling, resources, and a safe space for the families to connect. The media's attention, while bringing closure, also brought renewed pain, and careful management of their exposure was crucial. And in law enforcement training and best practices, the Jenkins case became a prime example for cold case units nationwide. The FBI's BAU integrated Ginny's methodology, particularly the importance of cross-referencing seemingly unrelated cases, the value of deep psychological profiling, and the power of looking for non-monetary sentimental evidence into their training programs. Ginny herself was invited to speak at numerous conferences, sharing the unique insights gleaned from this extraordinary investigation. Ongoing review of unlinked items. While the 27 items from the trophy box had all been linked to specific cases, the FBI conducted a final, exhaustive review of Jenkins's entire life and work history for any other anomalies or periods where he might have operated without taking a physical trophy, ensuring no stone was left unturned. This included reviewing minor incidents or disappearances that might not have met the initial MO criteria but occurred during his documented presence. The investigation officially concluded with a comprehensive report spanning thousands of pages, detailing the life and crimes of Raymond M. Jenkins. It was a testament to the dedication of countless investigators, but ultimately, it was the persistent intuition of one detective, Ginny O'Malley, and the quiet comfort of her border collie, Finn, that had lifted the veil from decades of silence and brought a monstrous truth into the light. The echoes of silence would resonate for a long time, a chilling reminder of the shadows that can persist and the extraordinary efforts required to dispel them. The initial shock and the raw outpouring of grief eventually gave way to a deeper, more sustained process of healing. Working with the FBI's Victim Services Unit and various trauma specialists, Ginny helped arrange for the network to meet every 6 months and facilitated virtual sessions with a dedicated trauma therapist. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a compassionate and experienced psychologist specializing in complex grief and post-traumatic stress, volunteered to lead these sessions. The first few sessions were still heavy, filled with tears and the recounting of nightmares. But Dr. Reed, with Ginny often observing quietly in the background, guided them with gentle expertise. She taught them coping mechanisms for flashbacks and hypervigilance, validated their feelings of anger and betrayal, and helped them understand that their grief was a lifelong journey, not a destination. It's not about getting over it, Dr. Reed would often say, her voice calm and reassuring. It's about learning to carry it, to integrate it into your story, and to find moments of peace and connection despite the pain. The regular meetings became a vital lifeline. Survivors who had once felt isolated by their unique tragedy now found solace in shared experience. The Thompson brothers from Jonesboro spoke with the Carson daughters from Texas about the lingering guilt of survival. The Dubois twins from Louisiana shared coping strategies with the Miller children from Little Rock for managing anxiety. The Hot Springs survivors, who had endured the loss of 4 family members, found a profound understanding from others who knew the specific, agonizing nature of Ray Jenkins's crimes. Finn, and occasionally other certified therapy dogs brought in by local victim support groups, continued to play a subtle but powerful role. During particularly emotional moments, the sight of a dog resting peacefully or a gentle nudge from a furry head provided a non-judgmental anchor, a silent reminder of comfort and safety. Ginny often noted how a survivor's tense shoulders would relax, or their breathing would deepen, simply from seeing Finn on the screen, a testament to the innate healing power of the human-animal bond. The families shared photos of their lost loved ones, not just as victims, but as vibrant individuals. They spoke of their parents, quirks, their dreams, the small, intimate details that Ray Jenkins had observed and then perverted. In sharing these memories, they reclaimed their loved ones from the monster's narrative, asserting their lives, not just their deaths. For Ginny, witnessing this collective healing was a profound experience. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of connection in the face of unimaginable horror. The echoes of silence would forever be a part of their lives. But through shared stories and mutual support, these families were slowly, bravely learning to transform those echoes from a haunting into a testament of their enduring love and strength.